Hey everyone, welcome to Monday, November 2nd. This is TechStrong TV. I'm Alan Shummo. Welcome to our show. Just a day here before Election Day in the U.S., so a lot of anxiety, excitement, planning, and hopefully things go well. No matter who you're voting for, you still have time to vote tomorrow, so please, if you can, vote. Beyond that, we are dealing with a bit of a crisis with this RYAC ransomware at healthcare providers that appears to be coming from Eastern Europe. We'll have more on that later this week with an interview with my friend Mike Murray. Just a lot going on in the world, and a lot going on, I'm sure, with you, a lot going on with myself and my family. But let's take a while and focus in on the worlds of cybersecurity, DevOps, cloud native, and digital transformation with today's show. We have some excellent interviews and news lined up for today. Among our guests this week, we have Fleming Shai, who's CTO over at Barracuda, and he's going to be talking about increased attacks around our EDU verticals and what's going on with schools and security. You know, with all the remote learning and everything, it opens up potential problems there. After that, I'm happy to introduce you to Sequence Security. Sequence may or may not be a company you're familiar with, but you know, the founders there come out of Symantec, and they really deal in the world of bots, things we're seeing now called sneaker box. And look, these bots and networks and stuff, it's a big business. And, you know, Sequence has been fighting the good fight here for a long time. Amaya Talwalkar of Sequence is going to tell us about it, a little bit about, you know, what's going on there. After that, I'm really happy. I have a friend of mine, Alex Arner, who's was the CEO of Rundeck, co-founder at Rundeck, along with Jonathan Rend. Jonathan Rendy is the SVP product at PagerDuty. Of course, PagerDuty acquired Rundeck, I guess about a month and a half ago. And I have them both on to talk about how that's going and kind of what were the driving forces behind the acquisition and where they see that going. And then on something old, we're going to go back to our recent DevOps experience earlier this month. It's a panel that I actually hosted on CD and Spinnaker. It's an all-star panel, though, I got to tell you. We've got Sarah Novotny from Microsoft, Kelsey Hightower from Google, Isaac Mascara and Drodio from Armory Networks, excuse me there for a moment, from Armory, and then Andy Glover of Netflix joins the panel as well. So it's a great panel on Spinnaker. I hope you'll enjoy it, and we have that for you. After that panel, we'll go over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor, chief content officer at MediaOps. Charlene has the news around the MediaOps sites today, as well as a good interview with the CEO of Clarity, Yana Vardy, about some of their new research detailing how IT and OT, you know, IoT kind of devices. Security professionals in the U.S. believe their organizations are now much more of a target, leading into this whole RYAC thing that I spoke to you about earlier. Great discussion there with Charlene. Charlene will also have a webinar preview of this week's webinars. We have an amazing lineup for webinars. I'll be back then to introduce Mitch Ashley over at the Analyst Corner. Mitch has a good interview today with Venkat Venaswamy, CEO and founder of Rockset, as well as another good interview with the co-founder of SkylarDB, CEO and co-founder of SkylarDB, Dor Laor. And good interview there. I was looking forward to that one, actually. And then I'll be back to close things up. That's it for today's show. We've got about 3 hours of really great, high-quality content. Sit tight, do what you need to do, and we'll be here. We're going to take a quick message. We'll be right back.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond. CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and Media Ops CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right. As I mentioned, our first guest today is Fleming Shi, CTO of Barracuda, talking about an increased threat we're seeing increased threats all over the place, but an increased threat over in the EDU sector. Here now's my interview with Fleming.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone. Thanks for joining us here on another segment for TechStrong TV. Our guest this segment is Fleming Shi. He's with Barracuda Networks. Fleming, welcome to TechStrong TV. How are you?
Doing very well. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. So Fleming, Barracuda is, I think most of our audience has certainly heard of Barracuda Networks. Most of our audience is not a stranger to what Barracuda does, one of the premier cyber providers in the world with a large, broad range of solutions for cyber. And actually beyond cyber, it's probably a disservice to just say all you do is cyber. All Barracuda does is cyber. They a lot of network and stuff like that, delivery. But Fleming, why don't we start off with a little bit of your background on what you do at Barracuda Networks?
Sure. Well, it's great to meet everyone here again. My background at Barracuda, I started as I started in 2004. So when I got here, Barracuda was already paying attention to how people communicate. So we were building a solution for email protection related to anti-spam. At that time, I started at Barracuda to build sort of the second solution, which is web security. Back in the days, web security was kind of hard to operate. So we made a device. Back in the days, devices were really cool. You put it you had a server room, you put it in the server room. We were starting to really start filtering your web traffic. That helped actually get us into the networking sort of the side of the house, really protecting people's browsers and, where they're visiting. If there's a drive-bys or anything like that, we can actually block them. In addition to that, the company completely evolved since the very beginning. Went from hardware to virtual, from virtual to public cloud. In public cloud, actually, we were one of the first ones to bring our solution to public cloud. And now we see public cloud infrastructure taking off, and there's a lot of services people use at home, including Zoom, for example, is using cloud infrastructure to make this work. So we realized the shift and where people are moving to. So our solution had really started to tailor towards protecting people's applications, obviously protecting people's email, including data that goes in and out, and making sure they're archived for compliance reasons. So overall, Barracuda's journey for me, it went from one product to multiple products to completely kind of going to various parts of the industry. And that's why it's exciting, because the segment that we service, besides the enterprises and larger customers, we really look for ways to service anyone who needs a solution. Let it be school districts, let it be restaurants or fire stations or municipalities. So we try to make our solution much easier to operate and also accessible and have all the cool features behind the scene, but we not necessarily have to make all the knobs available to everyone, because it can complicate things. So really, our company has been around for over close to 18 years. So all these years, what I have done at Barracuda, seeing how cybersecurity kind of evolve, it's really kind of the journey that we're working with our customer, right? If they're here, we protect them there. If otherwise, we move forward wherever they are. Yeah, so it's exciting.
Absolutely. I don't want to come across as old, but I remember when Barracuda started, and Dean Draco and back in those days, and still friends with Dean and all through the years. And you're right, there's always been, Barracuda in a lot of ways kind of made their bones servicing the SMB and mid-enterprise market, but also grew to service some of the largest enterprises.
Absolutely.
The world as well. And so there is that wide, as I said in the beginning, a broad range of solutions that Barracuda offers. Fleming, if it's okay, I wanted to kind of focus in a little bit on things that we're seeing like since COVID. And cybersecurity is more important than ever, but we're definitely seeing trends, things that have been made worse during COVID, and other things maybe not as bad. But as we've moved more to public cloud, we're obviously seeing the need to secure public cloud. We're also seeing the need to secure at-home remote workers on non-company owned devices, ransomware. I mean, unfortunately, the bad guys never miss an opportunity to take advantage of a crisis, right? And ransomware has been one of the dark holes, one of the black marks on all of this. We seem to be seeing more ransomware than ever. What about that?
Yeah, I think you hit it right on, because as I mentioned, we really care about where the customer is, how they operate. And a lot of the customers today are operating, majority of their user base could be working from home. And this is one area, we always had some working from home solutions in the past, let it be remote devices and stuff, but we keep it in a sense where that is the addition to your main workforce. But now it's kind of shifted, especially for tech workers who are able to work from home. So with the landscape kind of spread out and dispersed into home offices, first of all, the devices you touched on, right? Like not everybody is going to be able to, COVID hit so quick, so fast in the beginning. Not everybody is going to be able to say, oh, let's get everybody a laptop, or some people may have a laptop that was plugged into the wall, or desktop plugged into the wall at work. Going home, suddenly you have a new network environment, and it's not the most secure environment, right? It's designed to allow you to stream videos and hopefully do a few things in the house, but not really in passing customer data, all that stuff. And not only that, dispersion to the house is very important, but think about what are people using at home. They're using SaaS, right? The other side of the house who is providing these services are operating in the cloud. Let it be AWS, Azure, or GCP, or like Zoom, has probably multiple clouds behind the scene to support it. Those SaaS solutions are also vulnerable because they're more usage. So the attacks related to ransomware, quickly, if you think about the attackers, it's like, wow, now I have a lot more windows and doors, literally more windows and doors, right? And it's
need to be protected.
Network. It's do-it-yourself network, mostly at home. So the vulnerabilities are going to be up. And some of the stories we obviously build research on relates to how the impersonation happened related to COVID-19, targeting healthcare, targeting schools that's doing research for healthcare. You probably remember UC San Francisco's story. It's not news, right? It's something that got hit pretty big. And the impersonation goes beyond just CEOs and CFOs. In this scenario, they were impersonating WHO, actually pretending they're a World Health Organization, and really passing along attachment that could to actually steal your passwords on your machine. So think about that one angle. And then the other side, the bad guys are building botnets, no doubt. They're looking for ways to penetrate more infrastructure so they can build up their arsenal to carry out more attacks. So this COVID scenario was a perfect storm for the bad guys to create such powerful networks of potentially go beyond pandemic and affect our election, right? So if you think about that, it wasn't, yeah, this is a tough year. But, of course, there's so many vendors and solutions are looking at this. Providing, security at home is no longer just about the perimeter and using VPNs. You have to have some contextual based profiling the device, make sure the device is up to par before they can access anything, let it be network or SaaS, anything like that. So zero trust really carried that meaning as in, I don't trust your device regardless of what it is, but you have to let me know, your identity, your posture, your patch level, for example. All those things are part of the posture, and all those things adds up to a qualification for you to access these work related infrastructures and applications. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I mean, let's dig in a little bit more on ransomware, and then I want to talk about some other things. But
yeah, sure.
We do a show here called CISO Talk every other week, a video segment about an hour with different CISOs. And on our last segment, which I think just aired this week, we talked about how the federal government has now come out and said it's illegal or wrong to pay the policy is do not pay the ransom in ransomware.
Yeah.
And that puts a lot of organizations in a very tough place, right? Because it's crazy. You could be working at home, you click on some email innocently enough, your machine gets ransomed, right? Your machine gets encrypted. And you could say, well, it's not the stuff up in the cloud, but number one, you can't transfer it to the cloud stuff.
Absolutely.
But number two, how are you supposed to work, right, without it? And paying the whatever it is, $200, $300 sometimes seems trivial in the bigger picture, assuming that they will unencrypt your device, right, or your assets. But I mean, Barracuda looks at this across many organizations, different sizes, different circumstances. What are you seeing with that? What are you recommending?
Yeah, actually, you probably find some traces of me talking about this particular topic. I think that there's a couple items. The ransomware is no longer just about encrypting a file and not giving back to you, like keeping you from accessing your file. Now there is a follow-up attack, which is usually extortion. And what that means is they will say, now we have your data, we'll give you the data back, so you pay, maybe first payment. Second payment, if you don't pay, I will put the data at risk, right? I'll expose the data to the world. So because of that nature, it's no longer just about inconvenience and not able to get to the file, or you have to go restore from a backup and lose a week worth of the data, actual work. It's about protecting the customer. So when it comes to that level, as I kind of predicted in the past, the bad guys, once they get the data, they can do the second payment, they can do the third, they can ransom you as many times as they want, they can put you on a monthly payment, all those things. So it is a tough one to swallow, but I think the federal government is doing the right thing, because that mentality of paying the ransom, it really energizes the bad guys, right? If you think about it. And really what's really important is put, a framework in place so the data especially relates to personal identity, all the, let's say, health records, anything that's really important to someone, like our credit card reports and credit card scores and all those information. We need to put a safeguard around it. So the data, even being stolen or encrypted through ransomware, and the guys have access to it, they cannot open it. So there's got to be encryption ahead of time to do that. Secondly, I think applying a legal procedure in place, it will remind folks who are touching this data how important this is now. It's really kind of affecting people's lives. So they can put, measures in front preventing from ever happening, right? So preemptive kind of solution. And I don't think that, there's got to be like something similar to, 3 strikes, you're out, or something like that, just to make sure people are allowed to make some mistakes, or, and, not able to see the attack coming. It's one problem. And obviously, like you said, now with home offices opened up, you're going to have a lot more entryways, right? And you think about it, at home, who do you have? You have, during the pandemic, you have parents working, you have kids going to school. School systems can be this sort of the window and get in, then from there, they can laterally move around and get further and further, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's important to not pay the ransom and put some guardrails in place and make sure people don't get, into, I would just say, legal trouble on their first or second attempt. I think, if they don't get better, that's got to be some kind of fine and punishment. But I think overall, not paying ransom is the right way moving forward. But it needs everyone to work together. The government, the industry, everyone providing a sort of a path to success. Otherwise, everyone feel like constrained. Okay, if something happens, I cannot operate anymore, and what am I going to do? My business is going to close, right? So generally, I think that's the idea: is make sure we have a really well thought out procedure and ecosystem to support something initiative to not pay the ransom. Yeah.
Fair enough. I mean, we're just one more area I want to cover, and we probably won't have time beyond that. And that is, we call it zero trust, of course, right? But the idea that everyone working from home and everything, they're on different networks. You're not on a network with a big firewall. A lot of people aren't VPNing. It seems redundant to VPN back in over the WAN to go back out to the public cloud.
Yeah.
So they go direct from their laptops or devices.
Yeah.
And there's no router, there's no firewall, there's no UTM, there's no, there's nothing. There's no, the whole concept, and we work so hard of setting up a network.
Yeah.
Zero trust, all of these things, sandboxing traffic, kind of out the window a little bit, right? It's very hard to enforce that kind of stuff.
Right.
Again, what's Barracuda seeing there?
Yeah, I think that actually zero trust several years ago, before the pandemic, and zero trust today, it changed a little bit already, right? Back in the days, zero trust really means overlay on top of networks that you already have, even an overlay on top of your VPN network. So the point there is to provide service to anybody to be able to group together and solve a problem, right? Let it be contractors from Hong Kong, Taiwan, Korea, China, Japan, anything like that. Once you're done, you wipe out that network without touching the actual logical or physical network. But with the zero trust today, it's about work anywhere with your own people who are touching SaaS solutions, the data that's sensitive to your customers. And I think that's the difference. And really what that means is the endpoint solution is no longer just about antivirus. It's about identifying your work zone, whether it's secure enough to be able to access the data, touch the data, access the SaaS that you provide to your employees, right? Let it be Salesforce or some healthcare app or a CRM solution other than Salesforce, anything like that. So given that, I think the key there is to come up with a solution or a practice and strategy to make sure every device is treated equal, in a sense where they all start with zero trust. You have to qualify a few checkboxes before you can even get into a certain environment. So that's a complete mentality shift, because you're absolutely right. VPNs are designed for more continuous networking devices and systems, so they can stay connected all the time and communicate in different locations. But from home, people are trying to get into a SaaS application without a VPN, overlay on top. So that's the piece I think people need to pay attention. Make sure that you have a strategy to, contextually profile your users, the devices they use, and everything from phones, Android, doesn't matter if it's Android or iOS, to laptops, to make sure they're good enough before they can access an app. So I think that's the kind of the change, and it's probably going to stay for a while. This pandemic is not completely over, and I think a lot of tech workers probably prefer to work from remotely in the future. One example is that if you don't have the right patches on your system from your operating system provider, you shouldn't have access to certain assets. Another one is you're traveling, or even in a scenario you work from home, but you decided to go to a Starbucks to take a break, and that network may not be secure, even worse than your home network, right?
Yeah.
So those are contextual elements that provides that indicator whether the user or the device is ready to go to actually participate in your network. Yeah.
Absolutely. Fleming, I told you the time goes quick. We're over 20 minutes already. I apologize. It goes quick. But look, thanks for coming on and talking with us. You'll have to come back and we'll continue the conversation, okay?
Absolutely. We'll catch up on more things for sure. Thank you, Alan, for having me.
All right. Fleming Shi from Barracuda Networks here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Next up, we have Amalia Tawalkar, one of the co-founders over at Sequence Security. They are all about bots, sneaker bots, defending these, and what you can do. This is a major problem. Listen to what Amalia has to say here. I think you'll enjoy the interview.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on another segment for TechStrong TV. Our guest for this segment is Amalia Tawalkar from Sequence Security. And Amalia, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on here. Amalia, why don't we start with a little background on both yourself and Sequence Security? Because this is the first time you've been on TechStrong TV. I don't know how many folks in our audience are familiar. So why don't we start with that?
Sure. As you said, my name is Amalia Tawalkar. I'm a co-founder and chief product officer at Sequence Security. Sequence is really the next generation application security platform that is protecting public-facing or consumer-facing web, mobile, and API applications from a variety of attacks. We started our roots with bot defense or mitigating bot attacks, and now have evolved to offering more than just the bot defense. We also offer API security as well as the threat prevention from a app firewall point of view. So think about your public-facing apps or APIs that could be targeted to a variety of threats, including business logic abuse, automated threats through bots, and API security, a comprehensive API security as a platform.
Sure. And I just want to say from the outset, for anyone watching, maybe want to get more information, Sequence Security is spelled CEQUENCE, security.com?
CEQUENCE.
Right. And is it sequence.com like that or sequencesecurity.com?
It's sequence.ai, sequence.ai.
AI. Very good. Just to give them a point of reference. And Amaya, if you don't mind, why don't you share with our audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, my background, as I said, I'm the co-founder and chief product officer here. Before that, I was at Symantec for about 10 years. I did a variety of roles there. Started off as an engineer in the intrusion prevention group. So my background is in the network security space. I went on to play different roles at Symantec. When I left, I was leading engineering for the entire anti-malware stack at Symantec. We shipped, the intrusion prevention, behavior blocking, a few other heuristics and ML and AI-based technologies. And these engines used to go, overnight to close to 200 million desktops or endpoints when we had an update. And we were blocking close to 2 billion threats on a yearly basis when I left. I'm pretty sure the number has, it's much higher than when I left Symantec. But just amazing threat space in terms of, we saw Stuxnets and all these other sort of APTs that were very, very popular for the wrong reason, obviously. But that was the fun time at Symantec. And prior to that, I was at a PKI security company called Valicert, which secured secure communication as well as messaging used by banks and government and defense.
I remember back, I had co-founded a company called Still Secure out of Boulder, Colorado. And this was from 2001 to about 2010. And one of our biggest customers was NMCI, Navy Marine Corps Internet.
Yeah.
And you probably remember them because they were a big Symantec IDS shop.
Correct. So I did that with NMCI, both at Valicert and at Symantec.
And now, those were it. So we provided NAC, Network Access Control, to NMCI, EDS, and then HP, and the whole thing there. But you want to talk about a threat-rich landscape and how many potential attacks, and those were, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but those were heavily attacked networks, right?
You're dealing with state actors, right? So extremely, well-funded,
sophisticated,
actors, very sophistication. Yeah, different threat
absolutely.
actors. So comparing that to Sequence, if I may, you're dealing with state actors there. Here, what you're dealing with is really the crown jewels of large enterprises. I mean, we are deployed in Fortune 50 finance, Fortune 100 retail, right? Travel, hospitality, social media companies. And these are consumer-facing applications. This is where enterprises are doing billions and billions of dollars of commerce, and we are protecting them. So although one can argue the sophistication may not be there of a Stuxnet or a APT, or an NMCI type of target, but the sensitivity to protecting these apps and not disrupting them, not interfering with them, is at a very different level than that threat space.
Yeah, I think the other thing is so there's a couple of things. One is the attack surface, right? Because some of these are, not that NMCI and government networks aren't big, they're big. But NMCI was sort of one network with hundreds of thousands of nodes, right? But when you're talking about large Fortune 50 enterprises, the way their networks are sprawling, right, is just an impossible. So not impossible, but it makes it very difficult to defend, that bigger sprawl, if you will. I think the other thing, though, is it's one thing to be the target of a state-sponsored attack that's very sophisticated, well-funded. The kinds of attacks you see at a lot of Fortune 50s, you still may see them, by the way. Let's not kid ourselves, right? But there's also the whole, the whole dark web, this whole network community, if you will, of attackers, of malware sort of perpetrators, and the communication among them and the sharing of knowledge and know-how makes like the sum of the whole greater than the parts, if you know what I'm saying, right? They represent a form, when they can do DDoS attacks, for instance, with the kind of, attacks per second and the sustained bandwidth that they're doing. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. I mean, it really is, it's crazy. That being said, with Sequence, you guys are really working a lot with bots. And of course, when we talk about DDoS and these kinds of things, it's bots that are helping make all of that happen. If you wouldn't mind sharing with us a little bit, give us some of the kind of the up-to-date 411 here.
Yeah, so bot attacks have evolved also like everything else. And as I said, the targets are really the crown jewels, the business-making applications in finance, retail, travel, hospitality, all these industries. So it's all about economics, right? Threat actors, state actors are very different. They are targeting certain, infrastructure or things of that nature. Here, it's all about economics. If it's a financial institute, they will try to do account takeover to commit some kind of money fraud. If it's a retail customer, retail, I find the most fascinating of all of these enterprises because they subject themselves to so many different varieties of bot attacks. And quite honestly, some of the tools that were sort of the first generation bot mitigation tools just couldn't handle all of the varieties. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But really, the most common form of a bot attack that almost any industry or any enterprise will face is an account takeover, which is try different user credentials that are available in the market for leaked credentials and keep trying them over and over and get some credentials valid. And then what you do with those valid credentials may differ from who the target is. But when you go into things like retail and hospitality, things get more and more interesting. So in retail, they are subject to scraping attacks, so comparative scraping. If I am a retailer A, 10 other retailers want to know how much is my inventory, what are my price, what is the price I'm setting on certain high demand items, things of that nature. They could be subject to gift card abuse or gift card threats, which is keep checking gift card numbers over and over again and see if you've hit a jackpot somewhere. And it sort of bleeds from multiple ways in the sense that not only the retailer then loses money on fraud that is associated with the gift cards, but they also pay the charges to these brokers that validate these gift card numbers for them. So there is a tremendous amount of pain that is associated with some of these things. The sort of the height of the pyramid, if you will, if you look at the bot attack and the sophistication, what we deal with in the sporting goods industry is sneaker bots, and it's you were mentioning about these communities and how they work with each other in the marketplaces and the dark web. I think it doesn't get any better than these sneaker bots or sneaker bot communities. These are extremely sophisticated, well organized. There is a lot of money to be made, and they can cause a lot of pain.
Talk to us a little bit, and don't mention names if you don't have to, but when we say like sneaker bots, what exactly are we talking about?
So you're talking about shopping for sneakers that are limited quantities, limited edition Air Jordans or Yeezys or the 5 other things that I can think of. They're very limited edition and they're released in small quantities at a time. And there is just disproportionate demand for these sneakers when they are sold. And so everybody wants them and they sell for a high price, no doubt about it. But people like you and me or my kids who are fans of these sneakers are hardly ever able to buy these sneakers. Instead, there is an industry that exists that uses various forms of bots or automation to go and take out all the inventory. And they go and resell these on secondary markets, sometimes for 3x or 5x of the price that the retailer is selling them for. And that's where the economy comes in, right? So it's just amazing how profitable this industry is and how many people are involved in it. If you just Google search for things like a Nike bot or sneaker bots, you will find there are GitHub repositories. There are people commercially selling these bots and the configurations associated with it. These bots will have 24/7 support. They will have guaranteed returns, and they will advertise that we guarantee return on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different merchants. So that means they have optimized their bot to work against a certain retailer. And if you are interested in buying from that retailer, you better go and get that bot. And so sometimes these are invitation only. These are very small communities that these bots are not available for normal people to go and buy. You have to be part of that community, if you will, and only then you get an invite to use the bot. So it's just a fascinating world out there. What these bots are. Yeah.
I mean, it really is, and I look. You're in the security world. I've been in the security world. We're both in here a long time. We take it for not granted, but it is what it is, right? When I speak to people outside of IT, consumers who are worried about security, and they hear about sneaker bots and the networks and the dark webs and all these things, they almost don't believe it, that it's that sophisticated, right? That it's that, why can't we be more secure? Why can't we, stop these things? It's because the people behind it, these communities they're not dumb. They're very smart people. They make a lot of money doing what they do. And the other, I think another misconception I'd love to hear your views on, especially here in the US, we think, all the members of the communities are, living in Eastern Europe or China or no, they're right here too. They're right here, and it's a worldwide kind of phenomenon, if that's not the way. It's a worldwide crime ring is what it is, right?
Absolutely.
And I think we got to recognize that. Recognize that. Let's talk about Sequence. What are you doing about it? How are you helping? Can we jump in there a little bit?
Sure. So as I mentioned, the level of sophistication varies from different industry, different type of botnet, or different type of bot activity or attack, right? Different level of sophistication for account takeover versus scraping. If you're just doing scraping versus if you're doing competitive scraping, whether you're doing carding or you're doing sneaker bots or other type of high demand, low supply type of situation. There have been multiple defenses that have existed for a while. When the early days of bot attacks, enterprises tended to use things like WAF, which is web application firewall, and some combination of rate limiting, geofencing to block these bot attacks. But these guys were jumping on that sort of bar very quickly. They were able to mutate or improvise very, very quickly to jump over the basic defenses. So that gave birth to the first generation of bot mitigation solutions. And what they did was collected signal from the end user device, whether it's a browser or from a desktop or a mobile device or mobile app, and they then made decisions whether the other end of the connection, is it a human being or a bot, based on a few heuristics that they collected on the device. They collected things like mouse movement, keyboard strikes, and gyroscopic information from the phone, things of that nature. And that was effective for a while. But one big challenge with those approaches is that, first of all, it's completely visible to the attacker that a particular tool or anti-bot solution is deployed just by looking at a cookie in the browser or looking at the mobile app and decomposing it. And so they have evolved. They have researched this Java, the script that collects these heuristics or the SDK on the mobile app, and they have figured out how to look like a human to these tools, right? So over a period of time, the effectiveness of these tools have declined. And so when Sequence started, we looked at some of these problems. We looked at some of the tools that existed in the market. And we said, look, one of the first principles we have to do is not be visible to the attackers. And this goes back to our Symantec days. Both the founders are from Symantec, Sequence founders. And what we said is, look, if you give out that JavaScript, you give out that mobile SDK, what you're doing is helping the attacker keep trying against that defense mechanism and jump over it eventually. And so the first thing you notice with a Sequence protected enterprise is nobody will know that they are being protected by Sequence. There is no browser cookie to look for. There is no mobile SDK integration to look for. Other things benefit from our approach is that these integrations that I'm talking about, which are integrated in the web apps or the mobile SDK, require a lot of time. They break that faster DevOps cycle, right, that people are now used to. You have to go and integrate into every single app that you want to protect. You have to go through the testing cycle. Sometimes these scripts or the SDKs break functionality, so you have to fix those things. And so it's just a lengthy process versus the way we have taken the approach to defending against these attacks does not require any application integration, does not require any application integration at all. And so instantaneously with a small config change, either at the network layer or the CDN layer, we are able to protect all of your apps. I mentioned the DevOps interference, but the other factor is you have to go one app at a time to securing these apps against these bot attacks. And while you are doing that, what the attackers are going to do is, okay, if you protect application A, you're going to find another app that is not protected by that JavaScript or the mobile SDK, and go after that instead of trying to jump over the bar that you've set. So the approach Sequence took is we want to be first invisible. We don't want any application integration. We sit closer to the apps that we protect, which are the consumer-facing apps in these large enterprises. And we just look at the network signal, and our ML and AI looks at not just single requests, but multiple requests are happening at the same time, look for common characteristics, common behavior across endpoints to look at bot activity and gives you a variety of ways to defend against them. The defense is also important. What you do with these bot attacks once you find them, once you detect them, is very critical. Our experience is if you just start blocking them, they know that they're getting blocked. They keep trying new techniques. So we have a way to deceptively respond to these bot actors so that they think that their bots are working fine, whereas in reality we are sort of gaming their efficiency or economy, if you will.
Brilliant. Great stuff. Great stuff. Amelia, we're past 20 minutes. I apologize. I told you it goes quickly. Once you start talking shop, it runs. Yeah. Maybe come back another time and tell us more about Sequence and more about what you guys are seeing out there in the malware bot world and the forces lined up against us. But for now, thanks for being our guest. It's Sequence with a C.AI, right?
Correct.
People can go check out more information there. And good luck to you. We'll have you back on soon.
Thank you very much, Alan. Anytime.
Thank you. Amelia Talwalkar, a co-founder, chief product officer at Sequence, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with another guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
So, but it's about a month and a half since Rundeck was acquired by PagerDuty. I had a chance now to catch up with Alex Honor, who is one of the co-founders and CEO of Rundeck, as well as Jonathan Rendy. Jonathan is the SVP of product at PagerDuty. And we had a good chat about why PagerDuty acquired Rundeck, what they liked about it, and what we can expect to see from the organization going forward as they continue to integrate Rundeck and do great things for the ops folks out there. So here's my interview with Jonathan Rendy and Alex Honor of PagerDuty.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another segment for TechStrong TV. I'm really excited about this segment. I've been trying to get these two guys on the show pretty much since the deal was announced. We'll get into the deal and everything, but let me introduce you first of all. We have Jonathan Rendy, who is SVP of product, if I'm not mistaken. Correct, Jonathan?
Correct, that's it.
Yep, at PagerDuty, which is a company our audience is pretty familiar with. And joining Jonathan and I is my friend Alex Honor. Alex is now GM VP of Rundeck at PagerDuty. But Alex, of course, along with our friend Damon Edwards, were co-founders of Rundeck, and Alex was CEO there. Hey, Alex, welcome and congratulations.
Hey, thank you so much. Great to be here, Alan.
Actually, congratulations to you as well, Jonathan. You guys seem to have acquired a couple of great people, great company, great service tool, great software. So all good. So of course, the big news that we originally wanted to, why we brought this all together was the announced acquisition by PagerDuty of Rundeck. We covered it on DevOps.com. Very happy all around. But, why don't we do a little prelude to the acquisition by kind of laying a foundation here of, first of all, as I said, our audience is familiar with PagerDuty. But Jonathan, give us a little background. And then Alex, if you don't mind, maybe a little Rundeck background.
Yeah,
Jonathan, go ahead.
That sounds great. So most of you out there know PagerDuty as, engaging people when there are major unexpected events and pulling the right people into the issues to address them correctly. For a long time, we've always viewed that as automation of an orchestration of people. And I know Rachel in previous programs has spoken about that as well. What we always felt was missing is the second half of that. So the notion of machine automation, runbook automation, like how you diagnose and how you resolve from a machine automation level versus just bringing some important context to the table so people can then address and fix those problems. So we thought of this as very additive in that way, very additive in combining machine automation with people orchestration and automation. And that's a big strategic part of why this is so important first. And secondly, I would say we were getting tremendous signals from our customers, from our users. Over a year ago, I had a couple of meetings and discussions with folks who were already using the open source version of Rundeck and integrating that themselves with PagerDuty to do some of these, interesting activities of not only better centralizing, runbook automation information, but then automating it in jobs and integrating that into the PagerDuty incident response process. Think of it as the complete life cycle of the incident response activity from beginning to end with automation all along the way. So that's the genesis and the reason why.
That makes a ton of sense. And thanks for that, Jonathan. Alex, why don't we, so in my background, I was a VP Corp Dev Biz Dev for many years. One of the companies back in the dot-com days. We did 30 acquisitions in 36 months. It was crazy, one a month basically, and over a 3-year period. And included, my company was the second company acquired. Right, and then I went on to be VP Biz Dev Corp Dev. So I've been on both sides of these tables. And it's interesting to say the least, and everyone is different. Alex, why don't you give us maybe a little bit of your perspective here?
Well, of course, it's maybe to start off a little bit with Rundeck. You know, Rundeck goes back early in those DevOps days. I remember meeting you at I think it was a Cloud Connect back maybe 2011, you know, a typical hallway track, just chatting between sessions. And, but yeah, those were the early days of Rundeck. And, you know, thanks to Damon and guys like yourself and John Willis, you know, connected up with those early influencers of the DevOps movement. And we always kind of carved ourselves out as the ops side of DevOps. You know, my personal background is a mix between the two. And I've always had a lot of empathy and, you know, just the experience of what it's like to have the high stakes game of ops. You know, we really wanted to dedicate our efforts there. And, you know, fast forward, you know, up to about 2017, we just saw more and more through digital transformation, people moving to the cloud, having to have quicker turnaround times, that automation became less and less a nice to have and a more and more must have. And bring us to today, you know, it's now a survival thing. You've got to have automation. And I think everybody's starting to see that. But, you know, really we learned all this from our community, the open source community, lots of innovative people out there doing so many interesting things. But what we noticed is that it really fell in two big buckets, either incident response or service management. And if you boil them down, there's a big similarity, and that is something happened we need to take care of right away. And, you know, ops people are always used to having to, you know, spur the moment, you know, take care of whatever it is impacting a customer or working with another team to help with the delivery. But they just kept mounting and mounting. You add to that, things always go wrong in ops. And the more things get transformed digitally, the more services, the more they interconnect, the more chance things can go wrong. And so this is really where Rundeck came into play. And I think we really started picking up on PagerDuty because I always described the Rundeck ecosystem as a triangle. On one side would be like the workflow automation. So you could think about incidents and PagerDuty sitting there. The other side, insights. You can think of monitoring and, you know, AI ops and those things, getting signals about what's going on in the world. And then at the bottom of the triangle being tools and infrastructure, because that's really where the ops people are having to interact, you know, taking care of infrastructure, running through tools, and Rundeck being that thing in the middle that helps connect it all and provide a good human experience for those frontline people having to deal with all that. Well, you can imagine, I see PagerDuty on two sides of that triangle, and I realize this is a match made in heaven. And, you know, I was describing it to our communities, like, pick your two favorite flavors, you know, vanilla chocolate, peanut butter jelly, whatever it might be. And so there's such huge synergy that we just felt like this was the great partner. And we really invested in our early integration with PagerDuty. It's great company, great folks to work with. And so it was just a natural progression when you kind of think about it in terms of the Rundeck timeline to connect with PagerDuty.
Excellent. Yeah, you know, I love the happy ending. But, you know, it sounds like it makes a ton of time. Before we get into kind of the nuts and bolts of the technology and the solution, what it means for the community and the audience, I want to talk a little bit. I mean, you know, look, the elephant in the room is we're all living in very unusual times, right? Normally, as Alex, I would see you at least 4 or 5 times a year at conferences, if not more, right? And the PagerDuty team too, we'd see them all over. We don't anymore. We're relegated to Zooms like this. But it's one thing to have to do that. It's another thing to acquire a company, not even being able to meet in person, right? At some level, or meeting in person being a risk that you may not want to take, right? So Jonathan, I know PagerDuty's done a few acquisitions over the years. They're not doing one a month, but how was it getting an acquisition done during COVID?
is different. It's different.
Yeah, to say the least.
It's much like even when you have to go through the process of bringing new members on your team today, you don't get to meet them in person. And this is, so there's so many additive synergies between Rundeck and PagerDuty that are so important. But yeah, Alex and I got to know each other, and the teams got to know each other at a couple of physical events early on, probably over a year ago. But really, we got to understand more of the synergies of the business all through 2 dimensions, like we're talking here today. And so the majority of everything we did in getting this agreement in place, bringing together these 2 companies, it was all done digitally. And so it was interesting. Funny enough, after we agreed and were ready to announce, we actually got together physically. The teams got together.
Did you? Good.
Socially distancing, of course, down in Alex's backyard, down in Santa Barbara. And it was really great to see everyone in 3 dimensions versus 2. And it really just built on, I say everything between the 2 organizations is additive. And that's what makes something like this so important in my mind. We've all, as you mentioned, referenced, been a part of situations where maybe there is overlap. And sometimes it can get, as you say, interesting. This isn't one of those times. Everything is additive, from the product to the use case to the value, and most importantly, to the people. As I got to know Alex more and vice versa, and Damon and Forrest and the whole team at Rundeck, we think a lot alike. And the philosophy of our products about empowering individuals to do their work in a DevOps mode, just makes a lot of sense. So culturally, I think important enough is maybe one of the biggest things that makes these kinds of events successful or not.
Absolutely. And of course, I mean, look, we've all been through the rodeo before, right? It's still early, right? And God willing, you'll be able to work in a semi-normal capacity again in some months, where you will have more 3D, kind of in-person interaction, and make the progress from there. So let's turn a little bit now, though, staying on the COVID theme a bit. Automation is more important than ever, right? In my conversations with PagerDuty, there are so many companies that are relying on PagerDuty to keep those wheels turning on our online doppelgangers. I mean, we all live online now, right? And so making sure that infrastructure is up, that these applications are functioning, right? To the ops point of view, Alex, whether you want to call it new ops, no ops, I get tired of all those names, but making sure stuff's running. And if it's not running, we know about it and we're fixing it, is more important than ever, right? And the only way to do it at these kinds of scales is you got to have automation, right, at the heart of it. So how is all of this playing out in the PagerDuty world, Jonathan? As we, there was already an integration partnership, but now, making that tighter, better, where customers can say, put their finger on something and say, wow, this really works for me now.
Well, a couple of things. First, we worked, as you referenced, probably 6 months, 12 months ago with Alex and Damon on what would make sense from an integration perspective, and getting that integration available in our marketplace. And customers started to use it right away. And it was because the use case is real. There's real value there in linking the 2 together, like, automating diagnostics and automating resolution. And I think what's been really validating for us is the conversations post the announcement with some of our largest customers. And Alex and I were talking about this just yesterday, that it's not just heads of automation and heads of incident response in their organizations, but it's even their management that understand the value immediately. I don't have to spend a lot of time explaining why to customers. They get it right away. And most of the time it's, hey, we really need to, we've been either using open source version. We've been using the enterprise version. We didn't understand this use case existed, so people want to jump on it right away. And that's been very gratifying.
Absolutely. Alex, what about from your point of view?
Yeah, well, we've been working with the ops teams to help automate, and we kind of put it into two analogies. We call it the Iron Man suit and the robots, and it really reflects, how people might want to begin that adoption, because depending where you are and what you have available, one of those two choices makes sense. So, the first one we call the Iron Man suit, and that's really about enabling people, those first responders most of the time, with actions that can either enrich an incident, so maybe get some more diagnostics, get some context, or in the best case, actually remediate and not have to go out and ask subject matter experts what to do. Well, that's one side. The other side is, what if we can just automate these away? And that's like your self-remediation, your automatic fixing. And you can imagine if you're maybe on the infrastructure monitoring side where you're looking for faults of some type, and you want to prevent having to bother anybody, but still record that something was fixed. And that's more the auto remediation. That side is more already, in the depths of how do you do that? What are the well-known problems that you could reliably fix automatically? And we call those the robots. So, really this is a spectrum. It's not that you have to be on one side or the other, but it's strategies for people to think about, where can I start given this business service or this team I'm working in?
Understood. Alex, I know you and Damon a long time, as we said. Not a large part, but certainly a part of the Rundeck model was like workshops and really going in, into ops teams and helping them with their decks, with their automation, with, making it happen. And I wonder, how does that manifest itself in the PagerDuty world? And I don't know if that's an Alex or a Jonathan or both, but views on that.
Well, maybe I'll start off. Yeah, so those workshops were great opportunities for Damon and I, because we really got to see how the work flowed, both from a delivery standpoint, or when things go wrong, what do people do? And we used lean principles. In fact, we really became lean aficionados or geeks, but really. And what you do there is you just break a process down into steps. You look for the delays, you look for the waste, you put metrics around it. But what we did really was to help people see how the work actually occurred. And we would call that bringing people to the Gemba, using a lean term there. And that was just revolutionary for the audience involved, because a lot of times you can't see what's happening digitally. It just is through tools, and the clock keeps turning, and the stress keeps building, but you don't really understand why things are moving slowly. So that really was kind of part of the DNA of Rundeck, of how can we think of those problems in terms of workflows that are automated, and cut out all that delay, and cut out all the wait time, and cut out all the information loss that happens when you have to go talk to a whole lot of people to get something done. And for us, connecting up with PagerDuty, it really becomes this holistic ideal solution where not only can you mobilize the people, reducing or really eliminating a lot of the wait time, and how do you escalate and get the right experts involved, and then connecting that to machine automation, which is where all the people on the keyboard would have to log into tools and twiddle the bits and turn the knobs and get things working again. With this combination, we really are eliminating a lot of what we would say in the lean days, muda, all that waste. So that's it from since you asked about the workshop side, Alan, I'd put it in those terms, but I'll turn it over to Jonathan.
Well, maybe the one piece I could add is the approach of lean, the approach of agility, the approach of automation. We've been at PagerDuty, as we've been going down this path with Rundeck, and probably dating back 12 to 18 months, we've really been focused on what can we do to add context and eliminate any inefficiencies in the bringing context, in the root cause analysis, in the triaging of the issues. But again, what was not there was the automation of actually applying the fix. And so I think that's where, when I was saying before, it's so additive, as we've continued in this lean approach of just the minimal people that need to be engaged, giving them all the information at their fingertips. But this next step of allowing them to automate everything and then really apply those fixes, that's the piece that was missing. And so very common approach, very common, in the same spirit of what we're trying to do. So it's, again, to me, it just feels like a great match.
Excellent. Guys, one other area I wanted to touch on too, and that's around open source community, stuff like that. Of course, Rundeck had a huge, the open source community has been a big part of the story, right? PagerDuty has always supported open source projects, right, that you've integrated with, though PagerDuty itself was not necessarily open source. How do you, Jonathan, I'm gonna ask you first this, you've just adopted an open source community there a little bit, right? How are you going to be a benevolent manager or papa of that community?
So we've adopted an approach at PagerDuty. This is, really our first material, like major coming together of two businesses like this. You mentioned we'd done a couple of others, but they were very minor. And I think the approach we're taking here is, the way I would say is, since everything is so additive, we use the internal do no harm. We want to create, Rundeck is a business. It's a thriving, growing, not only business, but community. And so PagerDuty has a community as well, not an open source community, but a community nonetheless. And we've been open sourcing best practices, as a lot of the folks on the line here know, for a long time. And we continue to do that. We don't release typically anything without some best practice open source information on that. So that's been a big part of it. But the idea has been, with this really partnership, I would say, is to allow Alex and the teams to continue what they're doing and actually protect that, because again, we don't need to spend a lot of time explaining what the synergies are to people. So it's, continue, adding and investing in the open source community is where we're at, and doing that through the leadership of Rundeck with Alex and Damon.
Cool. One more question for both of you, if you don't mind. So look, you had this partnership going back 6-12 months. The integrations were there. I think we've laid out a little bit about the synergies and how this all fits in, Alex. That triangle with PagerDuty having two parts of it, great. As we sit here today, it's October 28th or something, I forget. What does success look like 6 months, 9 months, a year from now? What is success? What would you look at and say, yes, this was a great merger acquisition, right? We've been melded the best and have, thesis, synthesis, and made it better, right? What does that look like to you? Either one of you can go first and let the other go after. Looks like, Alex, we voted on you.
It was like a game show. Who pushed the button?
Yeah. Well, everyone else stepped backwards. You stayed there. So, yeah.
Well, first of all, I would say for customers, what success would look like is that these things just naturally fit together and they approach them as a single solution. So coming in at the beginning, prior to our merging, there's the Rundeck part and there's the PagerDuty part. So within 6 to 12 months, from a customer experience standpoint, I want it to feel like it's just one solution. And that's going to mean a couple of things. Jonathan mentioned some of the best practices that were open source. I think we can also have some of those best practice run books for typical things. So when a user's thinking, how could I do this end to end? It's all one, unified clump. So that would be successful. The other thing is, you mentioned the open source. It's been a great place for us to just gain insight about how do you do these things, discover those best practices. So, aligning our community with the Rundeck community so that those best practices are flowing together. as well. You know, there's obviously some product things. I think Jonathan will get to that, but you know, Rundeck is connected up to all of the things at the machine layer, and there's a lot of data there. And so, you know, one thing that's personally interesting to me is how we can take the data that Rundeck's getting and tie it into the AI ops side that PagerDuty has, and what new insights are possible there. Because, you know, when things go wrong, you know, the ability to recommend what the next things to do is probably one of the most helpful things if you're on the front line and your hair's on fire. So I'll tee that up to Jonathan on how that might proceed in the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, there are a couple of areas that, to your question, Alan, of what success could look like. One is, like, what could it look like with the more of the 1 + 1 = 3? And given that, you know, the majority, or, you know, what Rundeck does today is a lot of really interesting and important information, but it's more of the, you know, kind of on-prem, behind the firewall type of information that's being gathered. I think that, along with the open source community, if we can pull that together to do a couple of things, really help. Sorry, I have a golden retriever in the background here that's howling.
It's okay. Look, I thought it was the kids at first, but it's fine.
You know, one thing is, how can we help organizations in this automation process? And we've made a big investment over the last, you know, period of time in machine learning. And so what could we do to make suggestions leveraging that machine learning with the information and the data and that Rundeck has, to make some suggestions of what might make sense to automate, or if there are assets out there already that can be applied, what could we do there? So I think that's you know, one area where just leveraging really the intellectual property of the community for the good of the community and for customers would be amazing in my mind. And the second area that I would say is, you know, if you look at historically PagerDuty and you look historically at Rundeck, Rundeck has been in some really large organizations, important, long-standing organizations, and that's where a lot of the use of Rundeck started, in these larger enterprises. And PagerDuty actually got its start in the mid-market, a lot of small startups that were everything, you know, in AWS. And so I do actually think there's another opportunity out there for a lot of those kind of pure native public cloud organizations, big or small, to be able to, like what Alex and I would love to deliver, is a pure SaaS version of, you know, obviously there'd be an agent, but a pure SaaS version for those organizations that don't have any, you know, co-location, any, you know, on-prem systems, and how can they take advantage? And the community of the pure developers out there applying, you know, runbook automation. I think the operations teams have been doing this and doing this more successfully. And I think it's been more ad hoc, you know, talking to a lot of our community on the developer side. So I think exposing that audience to this, I think it's a win-win.
Agreed. Guys, I told you to go 20 minutes. We're probably at 25, 30 minutes. I apologize. It happens. But listen, Alex, first of all, man, congratulations to you and Damon. I told Damon this the day the news broke, and I spoke to him. Couldn't happen to two nicer people who were more deserving. And you're, you know, and you know, partnering up, or, you know, getting in here with PagerDuty, what a great company and organization for you guys to join and help grow going forward. Jonathan, congratulations to you and all the PagerDuty people. As you said, this is the first kind of big boy acquisition, if you will, that you guys have done. And, you know, as you integrate in, it's going to be exciting to see how it helps everybody in our community and our audience and going forward. Thanks for joining us on TechStrong TV.
Thank you so much.
Alrighty.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Alex Honor, Jonathan Wren, PagerDuty, Rundeck. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with another guest. So for something old today, we're going back to our DevOps experience of just 2 weeks ago. And this is a great panel I had the pleasure of hosting. I had two of my friends from the Armory on it, Isaac Mascara and Droidio, CEO and CTO, as well as Andy Glover of Netflix, Sarah Novotny of Microsoft, Kelsey Hightower of Google. And we had a great talk on the state of CI/CD and Spinnaker. Have a listen. Hey everyone, thanks for joining us on this great panel here where we're going to talk about Spinnaker, we're going to talk about enterprise class CD, and basically what we're seeing, especially during the last 7-8 months with COVID and how that maybe has affected things. Let me introduce you to this great panel first though, and we'll get started. I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to introduce each member and let them kind of introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Andy Glover. Andy comes to us from his garage today, but Andy, give our audience a little bit of background.
Hi everyone, my name is Andy Glover. I work at Netflix. I now run productivity engineering. I used to run delivery engineering, which is the team that created and runs Spinnaker at Netflix.
Fantastic, welcome Andy. Next to Andy, we have Isaac Mascara. Isaac, welcome. Give a little background.
How's it going? My name is Isaac Mascara. I'm a CTO and co-founder with Droidio here at Armory. Help run the product and engineering teams and trying to do all things continuous delivery.
Excellent. Next, we have Droidio.
Good morning. This is Droidio. I'm the CEO of Armory. And Alan, last time we were on, we couldn't talk about this. We hadn't announced it yet, but we just announced this week a $40 million Series C led by B Capital with Mark Benioff and Lead Edge participating. So really happy to just fuel the rocket ship here to continue bringing Spinnaker into the world.
Excellent. Next, we have Sarah.
And I am lucky to be an advisor for Armory, as well as my day job being working on open source in the Azure office as CTO.
And Sarah, I apologize. I didn't mention your last name. It's Sarah Novotny, correct?
You did it fine. It is Novotny, yes.
Okay. And then last but certainly not least, with the Space Invaders in the background, we've got Kelsey Hightower. Hey, Kelsey, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, Kelsey Hightower. You probably know me from the Kubernetes community. Work at Google Cloud, also an advisory to Armory and the whole Spinnaker movement.
Fantastic. So guys, the subject here today obviously is around Spinnaker. Droidio, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to kick off.
Yeah, sure. I mean, what excites me about this group is how we have the leaders in the Spinnaker community, Isaac and Andy on the steering committee, as well as leaders in open source from Microsoft and Google, just kind of talking about themes that enterprises are dealing with around software delivery. So what I'm hoping that we can do today is kind of share some stories about what we are seeing from Global 2000 enterprises that are trying to innovate. Like they're realizing that the way that they're going to accrue massive enterprise value over the coming decades is by being able to get their ideas out into the world as code. And the ability to do that with safety and velocity and not having to choose between the two. To me, that's like the thing that every Global 2000 is going to have to figure out how to do that at scale over the next decade. And like this community is the one that is helping companies figure that out.
Certainly. So, I mean, we've seen Spinnaker grow, right? And I think most of our audience is familiar enough with the Spinnaker story. You know, started with Google and Netflix, but as we've talked a little bit about off camera, it's grown beyond that, right? And we're going to talk about some specific examples, some specific use cases, and some specific ways that we're seeing Spinnaker out in the wild, if you will. Isaac, why don't you start us off maybe with some specific examples of where you see kind of Spinnaker's gone beyond its roots, where I don't want to say it's outgrown, but it's gone beyond its roots.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a few things that are kind of happening to make an environment where you need a tool like Spinnaker. I think the first thing that you really look at is the amount of money being poured into innovation from the three major cloud providers. So that's Microsoft, Google, and Amazon, pouring billions of dollars into the cloud. Now, what that means is that there's constant innovation, right? Every time that there is that there are yearly conferences for each one of these clouds they release hundreds, if not thousands, of services every year. Now, what happens in the enterprise is that it presents a challenge, right? Because the enterprises are so large. You have business units with thousands of developers. Some have 20, 30,000 developers. And we'll get into use cases where some companies have developers that aren't part of their, they're not W-2s, they're contractors. They have thousands of contractors. And what happens is they all need to use different parts of each cloud. What used to be, hey, when you deployed to Amazon in 2005, when I first started, you deployed to a VM. That's it. That's all you got, right? So you deployed to Amazon. If I were to tell you today, I'm deploying to Amazon, you'd be like, what does that mean? Because there's Kubernetes, there's ECS, there's Lambda. You can deploy websites into S3 and so many other things. And so what we're seeing now with enterprises, and I'll give you a good example here with Discovery. Right, so Discovery Networks, of course, we all know Shark Week. They also own a bunch of different properties like the Food Network. And what they're trying to do, they have hundreds, thousands of developers, all trying to create applications, trying to get you great content. And what they're trying to do is able to have a centralized place where they can deploy to anything, really, right? I mean, if you think about what these enterprises do, is they acquire companies. When you acquire a company, you're also acquiring all their technology choices, which may be, if you're on Amazon, they may be on Google. And so what we're seeing now is they want to have a way to deploy to all of these endpoints, all of these targets, and they want to be able to do it with safety, security, make sure that they're meeting their compliance needs. And they want to do it from a single source, to be able to control this from a single source, right? Because, we also know what happens when people break compliance, right? It's a big deal. It's a lot of privacy concerns that we're seeing now in the world today around our data that is stored in all these different servers. You want to know, and you want to be able to trust that these companies who have our data are deploying software reliably and safely. And not just doing that safely, but also making sure that you're constantly updating the software, right? I mean, when we know that there's a security vulnerability, we want to know that they're in a position to actually update their software. And the reality is, most of these enterprises, are not in the position to redeploy their software. They've deployed it once 4 years ago, and they just kind of like let it go. And so now what we're seeing is, like, you need to be able to redeploy something every 30 days and do it reliably and safely. And this is where I think Spinnaker just shines, because it allows you to deploy to really any target. We have support from all of the clouds building this out with us.
Guys, any thoughts, comments on that?
I think a lot of people watching, you may fixate on the numbers like 30 days or, once a year. And again, I think the whole point of this is when it's ready, right? The last thing you want to do is have something that's ready, but you can't get it to your customers because you don't have a consistent or reliable way to get it to them. That is like the game plan. So if you're watching this and it's like, oh yeah, we can't do stuff in 30 days. We only really need to do things every 6 months. So we don't need any of this stuff. And that's not necessarily where you want to be. You want to say, look, if it's ready in 6 months, then it should be able to be deployed in 6 months and 2 minutes, right? If that is your time horizon and your time boundary. And I think that's kind of the most important piece to take away. And the last thing is, like, Spinnaker, the tool, is amazing. And I think it's been hardened because people that have actually done the work, like actually use this tool to get software out there, it's all kind of rolled into Spinnaker. So that's what you're looking at. But the thing is, you got to still do the work. It's just that you have a tool that actually allows you to serialize the results of that work.
Yeah, I'd actually love.
Andy,
go ahead.
Go ahead,
Andy.
I was just going to say, because we were using the word deploy earlier, and to Kelsey's point, there's a lot of work, and I think that work is actually what I would call delivery, right? So deployment's usually just one step in delivery. It's usually the last one. And a big part about serializing, best practices, as Kelsey has talked about before, is this whole notion of like software delivery. And regardless of your time frame, you want that confidence whereby when you do deliver your software, you know that it's going to work. And also to Isaac's point, invariably it's not going to work. You're going to have problems. That's reality. And so you want the ability to rapidly and reliably deliver a fix. And so, to the point of even if you're, quote unquote, deploying every 6 months, you still want that 2 minutes where you can rapidly, reliably say it's now working, and then also make changes should it not be working, or you learn something very quickly from your customers that they don't like this feature, or they actually want more of that feature, and you probably don't want to wait another 6 months to give them more, so to speak.
Can I ask Andy a question? I know I'm not the moderator, but I just want to ask Andy a question.
No, feel free. Everyone has questions.
A lot of people are confused about how long it actually takes to get a good pipeline. So I have two questions. One is, and maybe you have the answer, maybe you don't. How long did it take to create this thing we call Spinnaker, from like, we need a tool, to having something with a name? And then imagine that very first pipeline that, before you had a great pattern, before you knew how to do this. Maybe shed some light on how long it takes to create a actual pipeline that's of any good or reusable.
Sure. So to the first question, how long did it take to basically create Spinnaker? You could say 7 years, because there were all these other things that were built across Netflix.
Let's pause for a second. 7 years. Some of you watching don't even have children that old. Some of you that are watching have not been in this industry that long. So make sure you hear clearly, 7 years, not 7 days, not download from GitHub and then boom, you're off. It took 7 years. So just conceptual. Sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure people understand.
Yeah, because and there were all these kind of iterations and lessons learned and dead ends, and then so that's just So there's and then we could even talk about the number of hours put into learning all these lessons that are now codified in code. To the last question, setting up an easy pipeline, or the first pipeline, it takes seconds, right? Because at Netflix, we had already, again, serialized kind of our best practices. We knew that to get something into quote unquote production, you had to do at a minimum, let's say 3 steps, whatever. Build the actual thing, so package it, test it, run some tests against it, and then deploy it. And actually, inherent in that test one is probably a deployment as well. So, but at a high level, we'll say there's 3 steps, and that pipeline, it's as long as it takes you to basically just say 1, 2, 3, in defining that pipeline. So, incredibly simple. Of course, then as you learn lessons from this, you realize, okay, well, I actually want to run a canary, or I want to do a more sophisticated type of test. Oh, it turns out that I actually want to have a rollout strategy whereby it's not one pipeline that does this, but it's maybe 3 pipelines that goes into different, let's say, rings or regions or whatever it is, company segmented the world, so to speak. So it starts out simple. You can get results very quickly, get a signal, and then you can evolve from that.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to call out there was how tall you need to be to ride the ride. You should be able to build your app. I know a lot of people still struggle with this concept of you wrote software that you can't build. You need to know how to test your app. These are so fundamental things that a lot of people don't have when they enter this, that they think that now that they get this thing, that they get those other 3 things for free.
Well, and to your point, right? And I think that's the danger of focusing in on this word deployment. And in fact, I was listening to a podcast recently, and it was a very well-known large company that is, well-known for DevOps and doing amazing things. I'm a customer. And the person that was being interviewed kept harping on how many times they deploy a day. And I think that's like last year's metric, because it's all about delivery. And to your point, Kelsey, it's like, how tall do you have to be to ride this ride? You can be 3 feet to deploy, but you have to be 5'8" to actually validate this thing works, confidently do it with 0 human intervention, and roll it back when it doesn't work, because it is not going to work eventually. All big companies, whether it be the ones we chose not to talk about on this podcast, we all make mistakes, but the beauty is we quickly can fix them before anyone notices, without humans in the mix.
I actually want to tie a couple of themes together that I'm hearing from the three of you, because Isaac talked about the discovery use case and all of these different business units, as well as contractors that they don't control who are writing code that they're responsible for. And Kelsey talked about serializing the culture. And Andy, you're talking about reducing the cost of failure. And I've also heard you describe this as like limiting the blast radius of errors. And you know, that's what we're seeing from our customers. Like this is a very, very, you know, technical industry, but it really comes down to a very simple thing, which is like, it's around trust. It's around being able to treat failure as learning and not as bad. It's around having psychological safety in an organization so that people are able to innovate and willing to do so. And like, to me, the thing that's magical about Spinnaker is you're basically platforming these very, very simple human concepts that lead to velocity, or like you said, Kelsey, it going out when it's ready. Like, I don't know that executives often understand how soul-sucking it is for a developer to write code and have it sit on the shelf for a month. It's like, developers are artists, right? I want to get my ideas out into the world. I want to make an impact. I want to, you know, do amazing things. And when my organization doesn't trust me and is blocking me from being able to get that code out, you know, I might not care if it goes out to 100% of the population. I might be fine if it goes out to 1% in a canary, so that I can just learn from that code being in the wild and then iterate on it. And so Spinnaker, to me, is a way to platform a more sophisticated culture that allows, you know, executives who are like pointing at each other saying we have to innovate faster, but it's really like the executives that have all this fear about, you know, breaking customer trust. That, you know, you need that sophistication to get both safety and velocity, and that's the thing that's magical to me about Spinnaker.
Hey guys, I need to bring Sarah in here. Sarah, you need to be more aggressive with these guys here. What are you thinking from what you're hearing today?
It's all good. It is interesting to hear all of the comments, and the pieces that I was pulling out very much were around the trust. Trust, because basically what Spinnaker does is codifies the rules and allows you to have that trust by setting up a good constraint set. And so you have that trust to every developer who might be trying to push a piece of code out toward delivery, but you can also know that that meets all of your customer needs. And so you have this commutative relationship with trust, because as you're building your pipelines, you find errors, you bring them back. I mean, I'm repeating much of what was said, but like that for me is the underpinning of this and the big power, because culture change is hard. And culture change without some boundaries and some, cues and feedback to give you this worked well, this worked poorly. Without all of that, it is even harder to build cultures and change cultures. So as you're working within an organization that wants to adopt a tool, the reason I think most people want to adopt the tool is that they want the culture that the tool came from. And so they tie into each other in a way that they have to iterate. And I think again and again, we have to talk about iterating through this new tech. When you bring Spinnaker into an enterprise, you'll have to iterate and work to improve things. But it allows you not only to have continuous delivery, but to have continuous improvement.
Excellent. You know, to that point, Sarah, and to wrap up a little bit of a bow on this segment, people think, you know, they want to use Spinnaker because, hey, that's what the cool dudes at Netflix and Google used, right, or use, and we want to be like them. And then there's a segment of the audience, a segment of the market who says, no, we're not Netflix or not Google. We don't want to use what they use, but we still hear this Spinnaker thing can really help us. I think part of the issue, part of the challenge with Spinnaker is, yes, it's an enterprise tool. Yes, it's an enterprise tool. But what is an enterprise today? Who is you mentioned Discovery Networks. Yeah, they got 12 different TV networks and hundreds of shows. And yeah, they're a real enterprise. But what do we mean by enterprise use?
What are the characteristics?
Right, what is it? You got to have 10 apps running. Do you use Spinnaker if you only have one app or two apps? Do you need that multi-cloud? Do you need to, I'm not in the cloud at all. I'm totally on premises. I'm going to get to the cloud. What is what is that defining characteristic that says this is a good candidate for Spinnaker?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit to that point, which is, and I feel confident saying that if you have a handful of apps, or you're a startup with just a handful of developers, Spinnaker at that point is overkill, because you don't have the same security and compliancy concerns, and you're not deploying to Kubernetes, ECS, and Lambda at the same time. Most likely you're not. You might be, but most likely you're not, right? What we see is when, what we're trying to do is tackle a very complex problem, and that happens at a certain scale. And typically it's in the hundreds of something. Now, the reason I say something, because it could be, you can have hundreds of applications, hundreds of developers, 20, 30 different targets, whatever that metric of scale is for you, right? That brings in that complexity, right? Or you might have an extremely complex process in getting code into production. For example, things that are HIPAA compliant, right? If you're trying to aim for something like that, or FedGov compliant, right? Those are very complex things that you have to meet a lot of requirements for. This is where you really want to bring in something like Spinnaker, and you typically have those problems at the enterprise. And we're starting to see that again more and more, because like, what's the cost of creating a new application with all of these new technologies from the cloud? It's the barrier of entry has been reduced so much that we're just seeing an explosion of apps, and that's just a very complex problem. So you look, if you have like hundreds of apps. So in most organizations that we work with, or we see people use Spinnaker, they have thousands of applications, but we see them onboard hundreds at a time to bring them over and to be able to deploy those again with the safety and velocity that we had talked about earlier. So those are really the use cases that we're targeting and looking to solve for.
So there was,
Go ahead, Sarah.
Several of us. So there was an interesting statistic that that you all shared with me, Isaac and Drodio, which is 8 apps seems to be the tipping point where people dive in and start using it a lot more. And that speaks directly to your complexity. It suddenly, as soon as you start seeing that complexity as a benefit in some ways, when you see the benefits of Spinnaker, when you have this complexity, then you're able to move forward and dive in and really grow your usage of it.
Yeah, I would probably say the cost today, 2020, when we're doing this, that to install Spinnaker and run it yourself, you need justification. And this is why I think we try to use those metrics to say, okay, now it's worth it. But let's take this off. Let's say Army does a good job in the future, and that complexity is gone, the install complexity, right? Kubernetes went through this trajectory, Linux went through this trajectory. So once you remove that, then why would you use it? And I think if you're a developer watching this, or a company that writes any code, why do we use standard libraries, right? Because if you look at most language standard libraries, they're also overkill. Do I really need the ability to handle any TLS cipher when I'm doing an SSL connection? Probably not. You're going to use the one cipher that you need, or 2 or 3 that you want to support. But we use these standard libraries because we don't want to write all of this stuff from scratch, right? So we kind of pick a language that we typically measure by how strong is that standard library, like you see with Android on mobile, maybe iOS. Those are humongous platforms, but we use them for what we need. So if you're looking at this and you say, maybe you have experience, right? Maybe this is your 3rd startup, and it's just you 3, and you say, you know what, we're not doing this thing again, where we write a bunch of code, a bunch of bash scripts. We're just going to start with the right framework because we have experience around, we know that we plan to get bigger than just us 2. And a lot of enterprises will have small teams within them that also want to be very nimble. They may not be managing 1,000 applications in that small team. So I would say, think about Spinnaker as a standard library. You could go and try to piece together your own delivery platform yourself, or you can look at something like Spinnaker and say, oh, you know what? There's been a lot of people using this thing for a wide range of cases. Maybe it's like a pretty good standard library. If I only need 1/10 of that functionality, hopefully that 1/10 is really solid and has lots of usage. So I would probably say more about what is your maturity level, and do you understand where you're going to eventually end up with software engineering discipline? And maybe you start with a standard library instead of writing your own.
I just want to build on that, because that's exactly what we're seeing from companies that are becoming Armory customers. I mean, we just see this over and over and over again. These companies have had to build their own brittle paths to production. And why? Because every data center is unique. So my data center is different than yours. So I had to build it myself, and you had to build it yourself. And now as we're moving these workloads out of data centers and into the cloud, there can be that opportunity for that standardization and for those best practices to take hold. And that's like the thing that has made it possible for us to create a business on top of this project that is now becoming this new standard for like multi-cloud native software delivery, where you get best practices out of the box and you get that serialization of culture. You don't have to build it yourself. And it's like, nobody builds source control themselves anymore, right? Like, there's this evolution now where, we believe it is just inevitable that companies will realize it's not value add for me to build my path to production anymore. And I can't even keep up with all the innovation happening at the infrastructure layer anyway. So I need some sort of best in class tool now. And that's really the power that we see in Spinnaker.
It speaks exactly to Andy saying it took 7 years to build this. So if you want to go potentially build your own, plan for 7 years, plan for 5 if you're exceptionally good, and way better than the Netflix team even. But the point being that we're building on the shoulders of giants. The library example Kelsey gave was perfect. Like, this is the whole premise of open source. Do things that are context and not core to your business as open source. Share them as Netflix does. That's one of the models for open source. And then use that and share that and engage with the industry with that new best practice set.
I'd also just mention, like, it's not like these teams that have built this in-house homegrown tooling have built these amazing experiences for their customers, the developers, right? Like, we go into these companies over and over again, and they're like, yeah, we make our developers use this. They hate it. And they try to find ways around it in every possible chance they get. So it's like, let's bring something in that has these best practices that your developers can actually love and enjoy and get value from, and have like an amazing developer experience. That's just like a little side benefit of this whole thing, is like, it's actually can be a joy to like be a developer at a Global 2000 company instead of being like a soul sucking experience.
Someone asked me once when I was at Puppet Labs, who were our competitors? And I remember, in my head, it was like, oh, Ansible, Chef, you have all the kind of other people in the space. And you might attempt to do that when you think about Spinnaker. And I remember Luke Canese, the founder and the CEO at the time of Puppet Labs, he was like, we're competing with people who have nothing. We're competing with all the ad hoc batch scripts that, the person who wrote them left and no one knows how to use. We're not at the point now where everyone has a pretty good CI/CD pipeline going and they're just looking to optimize. We're dealing with like where the majority of people do not have anything in place to do this. So this is why I think the conversation today is not necessarily like, is Spinnaker the only way you can do it? You're really challenging yourself that, do you want to start with this standard library, or do you want to continue like operating and figuring this out on your own?
I think that's a valid, Kelsey, every startup I've ever done, our biggest competitor at first was always a spreadsheet. People, doing stuff manually in a spreadsheet. But just to give it some context, this is playing on our DevOps Experience virtual event. And we have another panel or just a session later on with Kosuke. I'm sure you guys all know. It's 10 years since Jenkins, split off from, I forgot the name of what Jenkins came from.
Hudson.
Yeah. So it's 10 years. So look, Jenkins and Spinnaker they're around the same age at this point, right? Because 7 years until Netflix got it done. I'm sorry.
Well, I should say, we didn't start writing what we call today Spinnaker 7 years ago. Right. There were evolutions, but actually at this point, Spinnaker is probably 6 years old.
Not a hell of a, in internet time, 6 to 10 years.
They're the same.
But they're contemporary, right? And this is what, And this is exactly it. And people are already looking at Jenkins saying, well, it doesn't work in Kubernetes. I got to use Jenkins X. I want to use Spinnaker. There's a whole bunch, there's many tools out here for CI/CD. But the points I want to make here is that Spinnaker is continuing to evolve and grow even as we sit here today. The Spinnaker.
Let's clarify. Let's clarify a little bit there. Jenkins does work with Kubernetes. I'm gonna be honest with you. I know we're on the Spinnaker thing, but because most of the times when I look at Spinnaker, it's a Spinnaker and story. Like I see a lot of people that are using Spinnaker and Jenkins, Spinnaker and Cloud Build. It's more of an and story because I think Andy kind of highlighted perfectly. It's about delivery. So there's a lot more than just kind of executing a certain order of steps. I think the difference though is, I remember when I started programming, I wrote everything in Python, and that Python standard library was really great and optimized for the things people were doing at the time. Fast forward to Spinnaker, it was built in the cloud world. So it had a good concept of a deploy target, kind of decoupled from, just running the things of execution. And also this concept of being able to do things like wait until a step is done, because you know that there's more that goes into this than just a bunch of maybe scripts running in a certain order. So I think it's more of, it came later, it came under another unique set of experiences. Those experiences got codified into the product. So when we say Spinnaker, the thing that lights up in your mind is like all of that experience encapsulated under this one kind of brand that we chose to give it. And that's why I think a lot of people see this as something that's maybe different than when Jenkins was created in its inception.
Yeah, as you were talking about that, one thing that comes up is that Spinnaker is very opinionated, and it can be in certain areas, right? I hear that all the time, and it's a reason for them not to use it, because I don't want to be like this other company, right? I want to be my own thing. But I think if you really look at what Spinnaker is, it's really a set of core actions, right? Building blocks. And the reality is that you can mix them and put them together to create your own, to codify your own culture. That when we say that, that's what we mean, right? So, and I found this actually kind of fascinating in speaking to a lot of companies. Like what Informatica calls a blue-green is not the same thing that Discovery calls a blue-green, or Airbnb calls a blue-green, or Pinterest calls a blue-green. I didn't realize that. I just always used the formal definition. But guess what? It's okay. You just have to kind of take the building blocks that Spinnaker gives you and put them together to define what blue-green means. So, all right. So what are those kind of stages and steps that we have, Andy? And you know this, which is like a blue-green could mean, hey, let's put one node behind the load balancer. Or actually, let's stand up one node. Like you said, Kelsey, let's wait 10 minutes. Let's do a dark test there to that particular node, then activate it against the load balancer, then scale that up, then go check, your logs. Then after that, actually start scaling down the other old version, and then eventually remove that old version, right? All of these things that I'm talking about, like you can mix and match to do what you want. And I think that's the thing that most people don't understand. Now, out of the box, if you want like blue-green in the way that we, the community, have built it and Netflix have built it, like, yeah, check that box. Boom, you get the blue-green. That is our opinion, right? That is our opinion. But you don't have to follow that opinion. You can create your own opinion if you feel like you have a different need. And that's just something that I've been meaning to bring up in these conversations, that I think we don't say that enough. And I think people get really scared because they're like, well, I don't want this other person's opinion. Cool. Create your own opinion. Create your own best practice. If you think you can do it better, or you have a better way, or you have a different requirement, do it. We're going to give you the building blocks. And you can think of it almost kind of like, how AWS and GCP and Azure give you the building blocks to create your own application and service. It's the same thing, but we're doing it for delivery. And I think that's really the strength in what Spinnaker is versus what I think other CD tools are doing.
Just one quick thing to add to that, Isaac, because we see this all the time. The problem that you have is when every team in your company is creating their own opinions and you don't have consistency across your company. So the ability to, serialize that culture and have a standard way of doing things that developers can switch teams. They don't have to learn an entirely new system. And you start to get that standardization across the company for some of your company's best practices is a really great benefit of Spinnaker. Like, we've got a customer that's got 35,000 application developers, and he doesn't want to be herding cats where like every team is doing something different. He wants to have more standardization in compliance, in policy, in workflows, and things like that. So giving teams flexibility. Yeah,
I was just about to add to that. It's there's some things that are not opinions, right? Like, SOX 2 is not an opinion. I can't have an opinion about that. That is a fact that I have to follow these policies. So, and SOX 2 doesn't care whether I'm deploying to Lambda or Kubernetes. They don't make a distinction in SOX 2 compliance, right? And so what we want to be able to do is like, look, you may have an opinion of how to deploy to Lambda and Kubernetes, but you got to follow, at minimum, you have to follow these rules. This is not an opinion, otherwise we'll fall out of compliance. And some of those, in some cases, especially in the finance world, they have legal implications or actual, like, it could have disastrous effect on our economy, right? Because some of these banks we work with are so large, right, that you have to follow these certain rules, right, that aren't opinions. So it's like, here, do what you want to do, but at minimum, you have to follow these things, right? And like you said, Droid, it's about the flexibility that you want to give your developers, allowing them to deploy where they need to deploy to, but at the same time, following the rules and the laws that you have to follow.
Can I hijack another question? I got one for Sarah.
But can I interject
All right,
first?
it goes Sarah, then we got to let Andy talk. He's been trying for a while.
He's been trying. Okay.
Go ahead, Sarah.
The thing that I was going to say is that you need first to model what you're doing when you start. Because if you model what you're doing, then you can find the spaces where you can add or draw benefit from a framework like this. But you don't start, or you don't immediately get a massive pipeline. You say, okay, so normally I do these 3 things. Great, I do those 3 things. And then right now I'm not gonna worry about the compliance piece because we have that in another tool or something. So then we'll put that in later. We can add that to the pipeline. That's the iterative part of this. And Spinnaker is a great tool for this precisely because Netflix spent several years making tools that weren't their end goal or satisfied their end goal for the time, but then evolved into Spinnaker. So you can benefit from all of the challenges they ran into, all of the things that they learned, and all of the work that they've put into this in a way that just you don't want to do yourself again.
Fair. Kelsey, we're going to let you question in a second, but Andy, statement, and then we'll go to Kelsey.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, because I know a number of times we talked about how companies, like, they don't want to be like Netflix or they don't want to be like Google, but I'm positive that they want to be able to beat their competition regardless of whatever market they're in. They want to move fast. Yep. And so regardless, I'm pretty sure those companies do not want their developers wasting time doing something that's already been done. To Kelsey's great point about standard libraries, like, it's inefficient to have all your teams do something different. So you might as well just gain the efficiency and make this thing a commodity, or use this commodity. And then the last thing I was thinking about with respect to just, like, factories and whatnot was this whole notion of, like, to Daniel's point, or Dorodio's point about, like, code, developers write it, they want to put it in front of people. Code that's not out in production is inventory, right? And you don't want a whole lot of inventory. Every business knows that. And so you want to be able to, when a developer has something that's like production ready, put it in front of your customers as confidently and rapidly as possible so that you can get a signal and either, do more of it or do less of it. But every company wants that regardless of domain, and you don't have to be like Netflix or Google to want that.
Kels?
So that piggybacks on the questions for Andy and Sarah, I would say. Every developer believes that they can do it better, do it their own way. How do you wrangle the cats? How do you say, look, I know you probably could, but here's why you shouldn't, and actually get them to change behavior to try to standardize, even if it means changing a little bit to bend in that direction?
Well, it's a combination of, one, it's a market economy. So yes, every developer thinks they can do it better. So you have to have a great relationship with your end users and understand kind of, well, what's the pain? Like, why would you do this better? Can we meet you halfway? Can we actually add that feature? So we've done that extensively with our stakeholders with respect to Spinnaker in terms of working very closely with the end user to make it a great experience so they don't feel the need to go around it. And then I think it goes back to the discussion of, like, we as a company, regardless of Netflix, Google, whatever company, ultimately really want developers working on quote unquote business logic. Like, you should not be toiling away on like the glue of SDLC like we've all done through our careers. Like, that's been solved. And in fact, you know, there is a little hump. You got to convince them. You got to show them, like, look how easy this was. We got this in front of, like, you know, the entire world in a matter of like minutes. And you got, like, to Daniel or to Rodeo's point, like, I wrote this feature, and within minutes, the entire world is now using it. Like, that's a huge boon, both for developers, the team, and the business itself. So it is actually an easy sell once you can kind of show them, like, look, it's live.
So there's another way to answer this, because yours covered it very well. The other piece is, this is open source. So participate, make it better if you think you can make it better. Like, come join, come engage, and don't spend your time recreating, but know that you can improve and act upon and see impact from the work and the ideas that you have. Now, not every company allows people to do that, but I think more and more often, especially if you can say, I'm not going to build my own, but I want to contribute, you know, this much time to a community and to support this tool that we use, that we have taken this giant dependency on. I think that's becoming more and more common, that development engineering managers can say, yeah, I can see the value in that, and the value in not building our own, which we will have to maintain. But it is an argument and discussion to have.
Sarah, and to kind of prove that point, we see that with Salesforce today. They're Spinnaker users, and they are heavy in the community. They are, you know, also consume multiple clouds, and they are helping make Spinnaker better, right? So, you know, Andy said it was, you know, we've been building this thing for 6 years. Yes, Netflix was a part of it, but there's other organizations also helping out and building. And that's a great point, right? If you don't see a feature, don't just throw away the whole, you know, the baby with the bathwater. Like, help us build it. Like, we're open. Like, please come join us.
That it takes a community.
Let me actually just expand on those 2 points, because I know we have to wrap up soon, and I just want to mention.
We've got about 3 minutes left, so and I want to give everyone.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. I just want to mention that to Sarah's point, the Spinnaker Summit is starting on October 19th, and it's actually running through November 12th. So it's a virtual event, and it's a few weeks of actually being able to get into it and learn and contribute. And so that's like Sarah, thank you for that point. And if you're watching this and you're curious and you want to participate, that's a great way to do it. SpinnakerSummit.com.
I was just going to make sure we hit that. Guys, we've got really 2 minutes left. Just want to give if anyone has a wrap up they want to mention or talk about, now's the time. Kelsey, you don't have anything?
I'm waiting. We got to share the mic.
All right. Anyone else? Otherwise, I'm giving it to Kelsey. It's his 2 minutes.
I'm yielding to Kelsey.
Yield to Kelsey.
Let me just say thank you to all of you for helping make this community incredible. So I think that's just my big thing, is I'm so grateful and appreciative of just your attention to creating something amazing for the world. A new standard library for software delivery.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything profound other than that there's a lot of work to this. And what I don't want to see is people say in 2 years, look, we built our own CI/CD system again. That's not the type of work we're talking about. Pipelines is a source of innovation. It's not, this is more like baking a cake. You can literally go to the grocery store, buy some ingredients, and bake a cake just like millions of hundreds of millions of other people before you have. This is literally that. We just want to make sure that you have the ability to actually do something more important, like throw that birthday party. There's a bigger picture here. That's not hyper optimized. And I think one way you can go about doing standard library, joining the community, learning from other people, and more importantly, you're probably going to do things that other people aren't doing. Feel free to share back, so that way other people can benefit from this thing. We keep it going.
Excellent. Guys, I'm going to need to end it right there. We're at the top of the hour. Sarah, Droidio, Isaac, Kelsey, Andy, thank you so much for joining us and educating us and the great discussion. We will try to do it again. Spinnaker Summit is for the rest, well, through November 12th. I was going to say the rest of the month, but through November 12th, SpinnakerSummit.com. Thanks for joining us here on DevOps Experience. This is Alan Schimmel. We're out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. Next up, we have our Chief Content Officer, Managing Editor, Charlene O'Hanlon. She's going to give us the news around the media ops sites today, as well as a good interview with Yannick Vardy, CEO of Clarity, and a preview of this week's webinars. The Clarity interview is pretty good. It's about a new research report about how IT and OT security professionals think that we're a target and things are changing rapidly. I think it's a theme on today's show. So here now is Charlene O'Hanlon, first with the news, then her interview, and a webinar preview.
Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. It is November 2nd, and I'm Charlene O'Hanlon here with the Monday edition of our headlines. Over on DevOps.com, we have an article that takes a look at the value in feedback loops in DevOps. Feedback loops exist in all industries, as we know. The author actually gives the example of air recirculation to heat or cool a room. And we all know the importance of feedback loops in fine-tuning operational strategies. In DevOps, feedback loops can provide valuable insight into cause and effect, how one system impacts others. But what often causes confusion is that folks don't recognize the fact that information and material flow are interconnected, as are request flow, development flow, and operations flow. It's like 3D chess. You have to consider feedback loops from all angles and take a big picture view at your systems and a fine-grained view of your feedback loops to adjust based on reality, not perception or plan. It's an insightful article and definitely one worth checking out. We also have an article on the language barrier between SREs and product managers when it comes to service level objectives. One of the core tenets of SREs is the idea of basing reliability goals on what makes customers happy. But that can be lost in translation when PMs and SREs start talking about the cost associated with it. The answer, according to the article, lies in user stories, narratives that describe how a particular type of user engages with the service. User stories are a great way for PMs to express a customer's experience and expectations to the engineering team. SREs can then translate the user stories into SLOs in a few simple steps. It's really an interesting take on how teams can approach meeting reliability goals and budgetary goals at the same time. In news, GitLab has updated its eponymous CI/CD platform with a range of new features, including an all-in-one tool for pen testing, malware analysis, and security assessment that runs both static and dynamic analysis of code running on Android, Apple iOS, or Windows platforms. GitLab 13.5 also includes improved collaboration features, including group wikis and snippets designed to facilitate code sharing among developers. And check out the post on DevOps.com to see what other features are in GitLab 13.5, many of which were created with the new work-from-home paradigm so many organizations are working under, as well as the accelerated digital transformation efforts currently underway, and many of which include mobile computing. And AppDynamics announced it has extended its observability capabilities of its namesake application performance management platform to ingest data from open source tools and agentless services alongside metrics collected via its agent software. It's part of a holistic approach to observability that its parent company, Cisco, is taking, as it recognizes digital business transformations currently underway depend on the ability to correlate events occurring in IT environments in real time. Without deep observability, it's impossible to know exactly what's happening in the network and the level of complexity involved in remediating any issues occurring. We've been hearing a lot lately about the observability space, and I expect we'll be hearing even more in the future as organizations increasingly understand the value of visibility into their IT operations. Over on Container Journal, we have an interesting take on container security and what it might take to more easily shift security left in the Kubernetes environments as more organizations adopt container orchestration platforms. According to a survey from StackRox that happened earlier this year, only 6% of Kubernetes users did not have a security incident in the last 12 months. Clearly, that needs to change. This article takes a look at what organizations need to do to make security an initial part of the conversation, not just the tools, but also the processes. If you're being tripped up by Kubernetes security, or if you've hesitated to adopt Kubernetes because security is too complicated, give this article a look. It might help you. All right, shifting over to Security Boulevard. We've got a deep dive into a new strain of malware called Egregor, which many researchers believe is a cousin to another strain detected earlier this year called SecMet. Egregor reared its ugly head in mid-September, and it shares many of the characteristics of its cousin, which is only older by only a few months. If you've heard about the alleged Barnes & Noble ransomware attack a few weeks back, and I say alleged because the company still is not fessing up to it, that was the work of Egregor. In all, 13 victims have been identified so far, 2 of which are gaming companies, Crytek and Ubisoft. This has been a banner year for ransomware, and we still have 2 months left in 2020. One can only imagine what's still in store for us. And we have an article that looks at the security implications of using Microsoft Teams to collaborate during the pandemic. You know, as organizations rushed to get their employees the tools they needed to work remotely at the start of the stay-at-home order, Microsoft Teams was convenient for its availability as a part of the Microsoft 365 suite. But now, 6 months plus into the pandemic, many organizations are wondering if the potential security implications were worth the convenience. So this article discusses what organizations can do to understand the data security chaos that is inherent in most Microsoft Teams environments and implementations. Lock down blatant security holes now using existing Office 365 security settings, and implement governance to drive more granular control and security awareness. All right, that's all that I have for the the headlines today, Monday, November 2nd. Tune in tomorrow, and I'll have another fresh batch of headlines for you. And also, just a quick reminder to make some time in your day tomorrow to go vote. So important. Thanks.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everybody, welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am here now with Yaniv Yardi, who is the CEO of a company called Clarity. Yaniv, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Charlene. Pleasure to be here.
Can you tell me a little bit about Clarity? I'm not really familiar with your company.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to. So Clarity is the leader in industrial cybersecurity. We provide a platform to answer the needs of the cybersecurity gap that companies have between IT and OT and the bridge to have there. Recently, more than ever, as you can see in the survey that we published lately, you have many companies that have to deal with challenges around the OT, the industrial networks, where companies are having a lot of exposure and risks in their industrial networks. And that was before COVID-19 as well, where they needed a solution to protect, to provide visibility on their assets. And we are here to help these companies in the different verticals and different industrial verticals to protect their assets, protect their industrial networks, and get to better productivity.
Nice. All right, great. So you mentioned a survey report that your company just came out with. Tell us a little bit about the report, what you guys were looking at, and maybe some of the results.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, we went to about 1,100 companies around the world where we tried to understand the impact of COVID-19 for these companies. What was very clear was first, and it was a surprise to me, that during COVID-19, companies were looking at technology, specifically on the security side, as a high priority. even higher than the crisis response plans that they needed to have. So that's one surprise I had, looking at the feedback that we got from 1,100 companies. The other insight we got from the report was that the IT-OT convergence that I was talking about, that my company is here to solve, is also accelerated, where there's a definite need to bridge between the OT, the industrial networks, and the IT network. But still, the IT and OT teams many times run in silos. The other insight that was very interesting was the actual verticals that were impacted in COVID-19. And number one was actually the life science, pharmaceuticals, where they were most impacted. And then you'd see also oil and gas that were, and critical infrastructure like utilities, electric utilities that were also impacted. Manufacturing, like automotive, were impacted as well. And the last one that was there in the list of the biggest 5 verticals to be impacted were building management systems.
Okay. All right. Well, that kind of makes sense. Especially as a lot of the buildings today are being built with smart technologies that allow them to manage their lights and their AC and other systems there to kind of help create a greener footprint, if you will. But I imagine that COVID-19 has had a huge impact on the way that these organizations are actually accessing their IoT and their operational technology networks. So, when you say that these organizations have been impacted by COVID-19, how exactly have they been impacted? Was it a manpower issue, or was it an accessibility issue, being able to access the networks, or was it something else altogether?
Yeah, I mean, we looked at many vulnerabilities that they had in these verticals that I've mentioned, from attacks that were done for ransomware and other objectives in these verticals, to other vulnerabilities that were exposed and communicated. And these attacks, for example, and threats, were an increase from last year, but even this year, it was an increase during COVID-19 than before. So if you look month over month, you would see more of these threats in the life science, in food and beverage, in the automotive, and in critical infrastructure like oil and gas and utilities.
What about the idea of air gapping certain systems, such as operational technology systems, to make them less accessible to accessible to other networks that make them vulnerable to attack? Is that something that can be done efficiently when we're talking about an era of everything is connected and we're using technology to make our lives easier, but obviously we're also in the process of making hackers' lives easier as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, the digital transformation is getting companies to improve the way they monitor and optimize their industrial networks. And that means they will connect more smart devices, more IoT devices. In simple words, behind digital transformation and Industry 4.0, that really means that to improve productivity, to improve their top-line revenues, they will connect more smart devices, more sensors. They will optimize their industrial control systems better. They will monitor it better. They will automate the processes. And that means that they will connect their OT and industrial networks to the IT network and create an exposure. And so if these companies would like to be competitive and increase productivity and generate top-line revenues, they will go and do that, and they are doing it. And they're doing it even before COVID-19. Now with COVID-19, the need to run better productivity and to be more competitive in different verticals is even bigger. Mm-hmm. And so the exposure and the risk is much bigger. And these companies need to address it.
So who ultimately then is responsible for that? Is it the IT department, or is it the operations, I guess, facilities management, or who should be kind of quote unquote in charge of the IT/OT network?
Yeah, good question. Look, the CISO is usually, and the CIO are usually responsible for that from a security perspective. The challenge is that the CISOs and CIOs mostly are very familiar and knowledgeable about the IT ecosystem, the cybersecurity in the IT ecosystem, and not that knowledgeable and familiar with the OT side, with the industrial networks. And so that creates a gap where security guys don't know much about the OT side, the OT guys don't know much about security. Mm-hmm. And so there's a gap between IT and OT. The way to solve it is really to bridge between the teams, right? And get the teams to work together. But when you have COVID-19 and you can't really get the teams to meet and work together, the challenge is even bigger.
So do you think that these organizations are maybe even becoming even bigger targets for cyber criminals as the pandemic continues, and really there doesn't seem to be much change in the way that a lot of organizations are operating in the wake of the pandemic, and everybody's working from home? I imagine we are somewhat in a kind of a phase 2. The honeymoon is over, if you will, with COVID-19, and a lot of organizations are now kind of taking a step back and seeing exactly what holes they need to fill to kind of fix the security compliance issues with their network, in the rush to get all of their employees connected. But do you think that we're gonna see these companies continue to be a larger target for hackers and cyber criminals?
I do, because if you look at the way these companies manage the operations, they get their users, the employees, to work remotely, and also the third-party vendors to connect remotely. And that creates a bigger exposure, and that creates a bigger threat. And unfortunately, there's more time for the outside attackers to look at that and to find ways to get in. And unfortunately, you have more remote access users and vendors. Now, you had that before COVID-19. But it's a bigger play. It's a much more used than before, the remote access. And that means that you need to set up the privileges and the access. And if you don't have the solution to manage adequately the remote access, the secure remote access, then you're exposed. And when you're exposed, bigger companies, when they do that and provide the remote access to users and third-party vendors, and not having a solution in place and exposing themselves, attackers sooner than later are getting in and knowing about that.
Well, that makes total sense. What about these organizations and digital transformation? Do you see that these organizations that are kind of grappling with both the IT, OT landscape, are they, how far along on their digital transformation journey are they? From a general perspective.
Yeah, so it really depends on the vertical, right? So and also the geographies. The Industry 4.0 started in Germany, where the automotive industry really started to be more automated than any other industry. But then the other industries like life science, for example, and food and beverage is also very advanced in digital transformation, where they're trying to gather the data, analyze the data to have better productivity, to have better results, to be more competitive. And so I see now in discrete manufacturing, process manufacturing, all the different segments of the industries are really pushing hard on getting the data, analyzing it, and improve productivity.
Okay, so from your perspective then, the companies that are quote unquote doing it right, as far as making sure their IT and their OT systems are secured, what are kind of some of the takeaways that you can learn from these companies that have really got, I don't want to say mastered, but at least they have a good handle on securing both their IT and their OT environments, especially in light of the fact that so many of them are converging now?
Yeah. So the way I see that, the first step is really to do the risk analysis, to understand what's the risk and what's the plan they need to have, right? And so, like I said, it's usually coming from the IT side to understand what's the OT exposure, what's the risk, where are the vulnerabilities, and what do they need to have in place. The second step is to get a solution in place to provide visibility. Because many times the industrial networks don't have the visibility. They don't know, what assets they have and what assets are connected and where. And so get visibility and map the network to be able to look at what they have. This is the second step. Because remember, you cannot really protect and manage what you don't see. You first need to see it, and then you can protect and manage it. And so visibility is the second thing. The third in the plan, I would definitely do the risk management and vulnerability management once you have visibility to your assets in your network, and then continuous threat detection to look at the threats, in real time and understand the situation. And the last thing I would say, in the platform, you really need to make sure you have the secured remote access, because that's the reality today. It was the reality prior to COVID-19, but with COVID-19, the world is changing, and more using remote access. And I think also post COVID-19, it will not go back to where we were before COVID-19. I'm sure, we will still act differently.
I agree.
Meaning, still, not going back to normal probably for a long time.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see a huge wave of automation in light of that, because so many things will have to be done remotely, and it just seems like the ripe technology to be able to handle a lot of the issues that are inevitable as a result of this. So, Yaniv, thank you so much for your insight. This is great information, and I'm sure there's plenty of takeaways. The Clarity research, if folks want to take a look at it, is that freely available?
Yes, absolutely. You can go into our website, clarity.com, and sign up and get to both the surveys as well as different research reports that we publish and available to the public.
Excellent. Well, Yaniv, thank you again for your time. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Arlene. Thank you.
All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, happy Monday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with the Monday edition of the Webinars Preview. We have a lot of webinars, as always, on DevOps.com, Container Journal, and Security Boulevard. Totally worth checking out, but I wanted to let you know about 3 that are coming up tomorrow, actually, that thought might be of interest to you. So without further ado, let's get going. First one is happening at 9 a.m. Eastern on Security Boulevard. Again, these are all happening on Tuesday, November 3rd. This one is called Cyber Threat Intelligence, Highlights and Trends for 2020. Judging from what we've seen this year, I have a feeling this webinar could be an hours-long event, but no, we only have an hour for it. This is a webinar in which the folks at Nokia are distilling information that was collected for this year's Nokia Threat Intelligence Report, taking a look at some of the past year's threat activity, including malware infections on mobile and fixed networks. Has had a year, that's for sure. The insights are based on data that was collected from the hundreds of millions of endpoints and IoT devices that are protected by Nokia's NetGuard endpoint security solution. So definitely lots of data points means lots of great data. We're going to be looking at threats, including the relationship between COVID-19 and malware infection rates, the surge in IoT infections, and the top malware seen so far in 2020. This is going to be really, really interesting and definitely one worth checking out. The next webinar is happening at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. It is the Broadcom-sponsored Enterprise DevOps series using VS Code and Zoe. This webinar takes a deep dive into the Zoe framework for mainframes and how it can help developers who have no mainframe experience to debug COBOL code and perform other mainframe-specific tasks successfully. The discussion will focus on how mainframe application development is merging with IT tool chains and processes, including CI/CD pipelines, and will include a demo of a mainframe developer cockpit that is designed for productivity and ready for shift-left automation. You know how much I love those demos, so I'm really looking forward to this one. All right, the final webinar today I want to let you know about is happening at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com, and it's called Staying Connected Through Teams, Collaboration from a Distance with X Matters. Now, we live in interesting times, I don't need to tell you that, but organizations have had to do a lot of strategizing to ensure a safe and productive workforce during this work-from-home era. This webinar takes a look at how X Matters can work with Microsoft Teams to help customers effectively manage incident response, and shares how some users have actually overcome that new challenge of remote work. And we'll discuss some flows that streamline incident response and then offer up some top-of-line research that shows how ChatOps has actually increased productivity and connection between DevOps teams across enterprises. I guess this is regardless of whether you work remotely or in the office. ChatOps is definitely a technology worth checking out for you. All right. Our webinars, as I said before, they're all happening tomorrow, Tuesday, on Security Boulevard and DevOps.com. So please check them out. But also, tomorrow is a very important day. Unless you've been living under a rock, you know that tomorrow is election day. So please, whatever you do, please take the time to go out and vote. And I will be back tomorrow with another edition of the Webinars Preview. So until then, have a great day and stay safe.
All right. Next up, we go to the Analyst Corner with Mitchell Ashley, CEO, founder of Accelerated Strategies Group. Mitchell's guest, he has 2 videos today. One is a follow-up with Venkat Vedarami, CEO and founder of Rockset. Mitchell recently did an interview with him, and this is a follow-up to it. And then he has another great interview with Dror Lahore, a CEO and co-founder of ScalaDB. I think it's a good one, and you'll enjoy it. Let's now go to the Analyst Corner with Mitchell Ashley.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, I'm joined again by Venkat Armani, who is CEO and founder of Rockset. He was just on, actually, recently on TechStrong TV, but we've got an update to give everybody. So welcome back, Venkat.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. It's a pleasure.
You bet. Well, I'm catching you on the go. You're a busy guy, so at least we got you via smartphone. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about Rockset, just for folks that may not have seen your other video with us.
Sure. My name is Venkat. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Rockset. Rockset is a real-time cloud database that makes it very, very simple for developers to build massive scale real-time applications. And previously, I was managing online data infrastructure at Facebook for about 8 years and helped scale the online data backend of Facebook from 40 million monthly active users to 1.5 billion from 2007 until 2015. And in the past 4 years, we've been trying to make it very, very simple for anybody to build massive scale real-time applications in the cloud.
Excellent. Great that we can benefit from Facebook in other ways besides just using the interface, scalability. So we're talking about a couple of announcements that you've just come out with here recently in the last few days. The first one is a funding announcement. Tell us about that.
Yes, we're very, very delighted to continue to work with our investors. So we announced that we raised $40 million in our Series B funding. This round was led by Sequoia Capital and also had participation from Greylock. The interesting thing about that was Greylock and Sequoia did do our seed round and also our Series A. And so this is the 3rd time in a row that these two amazing investors continue to believe in the mission and continue to believe in the product and the people and the traction and whatever, all the momentum behind the company, that they've tripled down the investment. And this is going to come in very, very handy for us to continue to grow on both the go-to-market side in terms of sales and marketing, and also on the product side in terms of product management and engineering.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, you said that was 14 or 40 million? $40 million. 40. Great.
Yeah.
Very good. I want to make sure that was clear because it's a significant round. So congratulations on closing that and keeping your investors interested, happy, and wanting you to do more great things. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
You bet. So let's talk about the second announcement. You have some product news, I would imagine, that will put some of that $40 million to good use. So tell us about your product announcement.
Yes, I think this is a very important. I'm really excited about this announcement. So till date, Rockset was only available as a fully managed SaaS offering, where the data has to be streamed or ingested into Rockset Cloud, and then you build applications on top of Rockset. And as of this announcement, what we call, we're announcing the ability for you to get the speed, scale, and simplicity of Rockset, but it will be available within your dedicated AWS VPC environment. So we're calling this private VPC deployments. And so this allows you to get all the power of Rockset, the simplicity and the scale, but while also meeting the highest data security and compliance needs our most demanding customers have. Mm-hmm. There's one subtle reason why this is significant for us. It is because when you are doing analytics, business analytics, a lot of the time companies work with just corporate data. It's their data, their business data, and they need to make a decision that only affects that particular company to figure out whether I want to use something like let's say a data warehouse. Let's say you're using a cloud data warehouse. and then it's just corporate data. But for us, people are building applications, real-time applications on top of Rockset, and a lot of the time, they are working with their end user data, end customer data, on top of which they are trying to build these applications, and they're trying to use Rockset to facilitate that. And so by providing the private VPC deployments, I think we give them the best of both worlds. It is still operationally simple. It is still massively scalable in the cloud. And you get all the speed and the performance that Rockset gives you for building real-time applications, but without having to make any compromises on your data or compliance needs, or security or compliance needs.
Now, as part of and great that we make that distinction too about building applications on top of this data, combining it with other information, other data, as opposed to just a generalized data warehouse kind of implementation. So in VPC, is this still offered as a managed service through you? Are you running and operating that private instance, if you will, of Rockset, or is this handed over to the customer? They run it as part of their AWS environment, and you're kind of hands off, other than releases and other things.
Oh, excellent question. No, it is still fully managed and operated by us. So the way we have designed it is that there is a very clean separation between the control plane and the data plane. And so the data plane lives within the private VPC deployment, which is inside the customer's AWS VPC account. Rockset will not have, or our employees or anybody outside our customers, company would not have any access to the data. The data plane is fully securely sitting inside their AWS VPC, but it still is connected and orchestrated by talking to our control plane. And so the control plane is something that essentially allows you to automate operations, automate deployments. And so all the bug fixes and patching and ongoing maintenance of the infrastructure that is part of the deployment is already taken care of by Rockset. And so this is why I mentioned it's like you get the best of both worlds. You get you have no operational overhead. You continuously get the latest and greatest features that we are constantly developing, and you get all that maintenance. So you don't need to hire people or do anything in terms of setup, install, configure. All of that is managed by Rockset, but your data still lives within your AWS VPC.
Excellent. Yeah, you do get that operational, that managed part of it, the benefit of it, as well as the capability and control your own data. You don't have to worry about data leakage into your or other businesses for that matter.
Correct. And even that connectivity that we're talking about between the control plane and the data plane goes over a private link, private VPC link. So it does not go through the internet. And so the data plane actually does not need any connectivity to the internet. It only needs a private VPC link to be able to talk to the control plane, which also does not have to go through the internet. It goes through a secure HTTPS connection.
That way it's all self-contained within an AWS environment, not leaving the cloud, if you will.
Yes, absolutely.
Very cool. Awesome. So is this generally available now, or is this going to be available in the near future?
It is available. We have a list of customers that we are working with, and if anybody's interested, you can contact us by coming to our website and following the Contact Us button, or requesting a demo from our website. We are actively onboarding customers right now, and it'll be generally available sometime next year.
Okay, excellent. So be able to work with you early, pre-GA, and get the benefits, and also kind of make sure that customer use cases are well supported in the product when it's released. That's a great opportunity.
Yeah. Yes, it is generally available for anybody who wants to use with us. It's just not self-service yet. That's just to clarify. I think sometime next year, you don't even need to contact us or work with us. You can come into Rockset and then just get started with your own AWS private VPC deployment by yourself. And so right now, I think we need to work with your SRE team, and with the customer's SRE team, and with the customer security teams to be able to set everything up, and that will get streamlined more and more. So it is available for anybody who wants it today, but there is some manual initial configuration and setup required that we work with our customers.
Excellent. great to get early access to it, and before the self-service is available, self-service version, if you will. Well, good. Anything else notable about the announcement you want to share with us?
Not really. I think we covered it pretty well. I think this whole control plane, data plane, I think is really new. I think it's very innovative that, especially for in the cloud, I think we expect this is going to become more and more the norm as data policies and regulations get more and more stringent. I think this is going to be the deployment, method of choice in the future. And so we're very, very glad that we're able to give this to our customers, right now, right here.
I'm curious. So one of the things, are you saying that this sort of VPC deployment into, your own AWS account or world and using it as a managed service, if you will, through the control plane, is that a unique or unusual kind of deployment model, a new emerging deployment model, or is that one that people are typically familiar with?
Oh, I think some companies already do this. I think we're not the first by any means. Some companies do this, but I think it's if you take most other cloud data platforms, it is more common to see deployments where they ask you to send all of your data, right? And it's fully managed and automated, and so you get a lot of operational simplicity that way. But the data is leaving your perimeter, and so you end up having to go through very deep security audits and with that independent database vendor to be able to figure out, are they going to be able to, are you compliant? Is your data secure? Is your customer's data secure? And so on and so forth. And so I think people will continue to do that if the value prop is really that high. But if there is a easily available deployment method where you can control the perimeter of the security perimeter and the compliance perimeter of your data, and you still get the simplicity of operations from the cloud, I feel like that's the best of both worlds.
Things like access control, access permissions, something that the customer has complete control over that way too. That's always a big auditable aspect of what we need to address within compliance. Who has access to this data? Do they need it? Should they have access? What have they done with it? That's all information that's going to be in their AWS environment.
Yep, I think absolutely. Once your data leaves and you're in a managed service, it's easy to even probably protect the data, but there is a lot of other ways things that also need to be secured. For example, what happens to the log of all the queries that you're running against the system, right? Is that the customer's data or is that the service provider's data, right? There are invariably, vital information that are in your queries. It's not necessarily in the responses. And so all these little gray areas, all of that is very cleanly solved when the data plane is fully separated from the control plane. Mm-hmm. And systems like, I think most fully managed kind of SaaS data providers in the cloud don't provide this just yet.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, it's great news. Great news. Great to see the deployment model evolve into something more flexible or more easy to administer, control, and govern, if you will, because that's super important with data.
That's right.
Great. Well, Venkat, it's been awesome to have you back. Thanks for this brief update, and we wish you the best, both with the investment of the funds from your round B or Series B, and also with this new announcement about the deployment model. Excited for Rockset and you and the team.
Thanks, Mitch. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks for having me again.
Great. And tell us again your website folks can go to.
It's rockset.com, ROCKSET.com, and you can request a demo from there. There is a free trial, the $300 credits baked in, so there is no credit card required to go and check out what we have. So if you are building real-time applications, if you're in the need for real-time analytics, go check us out. You won't regret it.
Excellent. Thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Well, today I'm joined by Dor Laor, who is CEO and co-founder of ScyllaDB. Welcome, Dor.
Hi, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure.
Absolute pleasure is definitely ours. It's definitely mine. Let's first start by having you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about ScyllaDB.
Sure. So I'm the co-founder and CEO of ScyllaDB, and I'm in engineering my roots. Born and raised in Israel, now I live in California. I was involved with infrastructure type of projects through all of my career, from building routers to building high availability systems and building other infrastructure like the KVM hypervisor, which we built with plenty of people that are involved with this company.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you decided to go start a database company? It's not like databases are new, right? We've had generations of different kinds of databases and technologies to solve new problems of application scale and gone to the cloud. Tell us a little bit about what was the problem that you saw in the market that was really missing that caused you to go start Scylla?
Certainly. So it's more. I have more than one story to share about that. So actually, when we started the company, we did think about numerous ideas that we can attack, and all of it in the deep infrastructure space. And one of the ideas was to come up with a new database optimized for SSDs. But it was 2012, and we figured, hey, like there are so many databases around, and SSD wasn't completely new. We thought probably the existing players are doing good job already about that, so let's not pick database. And we were experts in virtualization. In the previous company, we created the KVM hypervisor, and there was a lot of commonality between the previous company that my co-founder Avi and I were involved with to this company. So I'll go back and forth between the two. So we formed the KVM hypervisor in the other company. And also the other company called Kubernetes was an Israeli startup that eventually got acquired by Red Hat. And there we started doing something completely different with networking. That's the net part of Kubernetes. But we had to pivot, and had to pivot 3 times. It was actually a school to how to pivot, especially at the end where we pivoted to the right solution. And Avi had the brilliant idea how to rewrite an hypervisor. The Zen hypervisor was there, and we worked on the Zen hypervisor before, and VMware was established big player. But Avi had a really bright idea how to develop a new hypervisor from scratch. That was the KVM hypervisor. And indeed, the community loved it. It became immediately part of Linux. And Red Hat acquired the company, and we worked 4 years at Red Hat and continued to develop that hypervisor to make it the best hypervisor in the world. And today it runs Google, and it runs AWS and other infrastructure like OpenStack.
Mm-hmm. I know you'd use some other database technologies, right? You'd use NoSQL and I'm sure a number of others. So was it creating that hypervisor is what part of what led you to say, you know what, there's a real gap here. Let's go create a database specifically working well with Kubernetes? So
indirectly, and I'm getting there.
Okay.
So originally we did think about an alternative database implementation, but we didn't have lots of knowledge about databases, and we did have a lot of knowledge about virtualization and operating systems. So we thought that the company was founded with the premise of writing an operating system from scratch, dedicated for virtualization. And one of the work, and we run JVM-based applications. So we wanted to take a pretty common and complex JVM-based application and run it on our system and show the performance benefits of it. So we found one. It was the Cassandra database. Cassandra is known for its performance and its high availability properties. Also back in the days, back in 2013, 2014, that was the time frame where we developed that OS. And we ran Cassandra on our new OS that was right from scratch, a new kernel. And we showed that OS ran the Redis cache too. And with Redis, we managed to present a 70% performance improvement with Redis because we loaded Redis into the kernel space. And when we ran Cassandra, we didn't see a notable improvement. The problem was that the JVM is such a big and fat layer in the middle of the application code and the hardware that it's really almost impossible to get good performance out of it. Today, with the modern hardware, you can get good performance, but it's not amazing performance. And since we were experts in performance, in OS, in locking, in every aspect of a modern system, zero copy technology, this type of performance improvements, we were sure back in the days it's possible to rewrite the Cassandra from scratch and provide something better. Now, our OS hit adoption issues because Docker came along and provided the same solution from a different angle. So this is where we brought the pivot experience again back to the table. And with additional research, we figured out, hey, we can solve this problem way better than what the Cassandra folks have done it. And this is where we are 6 years after that pivot, and we're still charging the database the database field. But one thing that we did is that we kept the API the same. So on some, there are too many databases out there. And when I speak with customers, sometimes they say, I have 5 different databases. I just talked with a large company in China, and they told me that they have 40 different databases, and they're just dying to consolidate them. So indeed, there are too many databases. There are lots of usages, but many can be consolidated. And today, Scylla is one of the options to consolidate multiple usages into one extremely good database.
Let's talk about then, you mentioned pivots, and I appreciate that as a fellow entrepreneur. One of the pivots then also not only into the database world, but particularly around Cassandra, but also Kubernetes. Tell us about that as a focus for ScyllaDB, for the product Scylla.
Sure. And with Kubernetes, we had mixed feelings for quite some time, because on one hand, we appreciate Kubernetes a lot. On the other hand, this is yet another very big layer between your application and the OS and the hardware. And we're performance sensitive folks who appreciate extra performance, but we also appreciate manageability. So I think that Kubernetes has the right kind of the right capability to combine the two and bring or retain most of the performance level intact, not entirely. There's cost for containerization, but also to provide an additional value. And it gives a lot of control for the DevOps person. You have a capability of packaging, and not just one single application, but multiple additional applications in sidecars as pods. You can do things like rolling restarts and upgrades and backup and restore super easily. Even with the introduction of cloud and virtual machines, it still adds value. So we believe it's time to combine these two capabilities, and that can certainly work.
Is that part of what I know one of your products is Scylla Operator? Is that in part what it does is bring those environments together? You talk about rolling restarts and managing some of that environment.
Yeah, that's true. And I can expand. Not every application needs an operator. Kubernetes itself was formed to provide a solution for stateless applications. And this is where you normally do not need an additional operator. You just spin more pods, less pods, whatever. You just need a load balancer, and that's fine. It's not the case with stateful applications, because with a stateful application, let's say if one of the CLM distributed pods become unavailable, it's hard to say that what type of availability do you have? Is that intermediate? And this pod is supposed to get back to network while only for lack of availability for seconds or minutes? Or maybe this pod is forever gone, and the operator needs to automate things and also allow the humans to control. Because, for example, if it's just an intermediate failure and the pod will be back, maybe automatically, maybe with human intervention, then it's all fine. But if the pod will never go back, then Scylla manages its own replication. And normally, every piece of data is replicated 3 times. So if we know that this node will never go back, if it will be back for in a couple of seconds or minutes, then normally queries are answered by achieving a quorum. So two functional pods out of 3, that's normally fine and no problem that there's lack of temporal availability. But if it's more than that, then we need to rebuild another pod. And that's something that it's more heavyweight, because you may have 10 terabytes in a single pod, and that's a lot of data manipulation and exchanges. So that's where the operator kicks in and control these type of things. There's possibility through an operator to do also backup and restore, and to do additional operations that are more complicated and deal with data.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I know in addition to, you're talking about Cassandra and what you've done to get some of the performance gains with that, but also DynamoDB is one of the APIs that you've offered in your product suite that is very exciting about what Scylla is doing, what ScyllaDB is doing. Tell us a little bit about that environment. We're, of course, talking about DynamoDB within the AWS environment.
That's correct. So actually, Cassandra was inspired by DynamoDB, and there is a lot of in common in the Cassandra design and the Dynamo design and the Dynamo paper, and naturally Scylla, which is a re-implementation of Cassandra, we have lots of these concepts baked in Scylla. So it was a trivial decision for us to develop an additional API that will mimic and be a drop-in replacement for DynamoDB. So it's the same core database with an additional API that supports that. And there's interesting a comparison between the Cassandra API and the DynamoDB API on our website, because each has their own pros and cons. For instance, in Dynamo, there is load balancing, and in Cassandra and in the Cassandra API of Scylla, you can go directly to the specific node that has the data and eliminate another hop. So I just recommend the listeners to go to the website and check it out. And the nice thing, since Scylla is open source and provides an enterprise solution and as a service, our users can choose which flavor they like, and both in open source and the enterprise, they can select Kubernetes because it's quite convenient. So it's possible, this is the first time ever that you can take a beast like the DynamoDB, which can't be tamed or can only run within the AWS infrastructure, and run it on other tools, whether with the AWS cloud or on other clouds, or have hybrid modes, and also within Kubernetes, and bring the advantages of Kubernetes with the DynamoDB API. We have one interesting thing where AWS has this project of Outpost, where they bring their own hardware on-premise to organizations that are not willing to go yet, maybe it's not the right time, to the cloud. So on such outpost, we provide both a managed service, and one can also run Kubernetes on that outpost and run the same DynamoDB API, where AWS cannot provide DynamoDB service to an outpost.
Very good. We've kind of crossed the chasm a few times talking about operator and some of the capabilities that does, because it extends beyond the database environment. But of course, talking about Scylla as well as DynamoDB. How do you see those things tying together? Why offer an operator product as well as a database and APIs going into Dynamo, also managing Kubernetes?
We believe that users today need choice, both in the API of choice in the database level. It's super convenient to do a drop-in replacement and not to force them to rewrite their application. It takes time to rewrite an application. And also in terms of choices of how and where to deploy a single cloud, it's not enough today. It's really powerful to have the ability to move to other clouds and other data centers, and also to either I am an open source fan, then we love to have a bigger community and allow people to take the unpaid bits and deal with them. And actually, Scylla Operator is the place where we get lots of contributions because it's fast and evolving, and it's not as complicated as the core Scylla database. So it's really cool area to play with database and for fun and pleasure and also for value.
Excuse me, this can be quite complex sometimes too, so I can see why that would be a great source of innovation. It seems that one of the things that ScyllaDB has done well is leverage this concept of drop-in. A lot of companies don't. There's a lot of work up front to get things configured and kind of built into the pipeline or into the production environment. Where did that come from? Where did that principle of doing sort of drop-in approach to products come from?
First, I think that not just us, but unless they're a really, really compelling new approach, then you may not need to innovate. And both like in the Cassandra and Dynamo case, also in SQL, for example, we're not a relational database, but there's a lot of value in providing the same standard interface. It's just the fact that I can give you another example. Today we implement our as a service. It runs on AWS, and we're in the middle of implementing it on GCP, and the next cloud is Azure. And just in terms of each of these databases, each of these clouds have their own tools and a different way to create VMs, a different way to create networks and VPCs, and there's no standard. And there are tools like Terraform, for example, and the Pulumnik project that solves some of it, but it's not exactly as being like one tool, native tool that will be identical. So we believe that the right thing is to only innovate unless it's extremely new, innovative, valuable new API. Otherwise, keep doing the same. Back in 2000, my first job was for a terabit router, a company, and we tried to compete with Cisco's key business. And one of our best designs was a Cisco compatible CLI. It wasn't my decision, but I remembered it as one of the best decisions that we took. So that's a quick answer.
Reduce the friction, right? Make it easier for people. And you get to the value of your product, of your capability much quicker. Well, it's been great. There's some other resources. Of course, you can go to the Scylla website at scylla.com. That's certainly one resource. We did a webinar with one of your folks here earlier, and I think that went really well. There's some really good explanations about some of the more details about the performance gains that you were able to demonstrate. I thought it was pretty fascinating. So I'll include in the description of this video a link to that so folks can get to that easily. I know also you have a virtual conference coming up, right? The Scylla Summit in January. Is that correct?
That's correct. We've over the years we had normally a physical event for 4 summits. Now, due to Corona, obviously we're doing a virtual event, but now the registration is free, and we want and there's still, I think, the call for speaker is still open in the next week or two. So I encourage the audience to either propose themselves as speakers or just to attend. We have fabulous speakers on board, and we'll go as deep as it possibly can get to and cover super nice concepts from Kubernetes to DynamoDB and shard per core and lots of things that affect performance.
Great. A lot of things we're talking about today, and I'm sure in a lot more detail, some really great speakers. So I wish you the best in that conference as well. The dates for that conference are January 12th through the 24th. Did I get that correct?
It's 12th to 15 or 14. It's 3-day conference.
Oh, 14th. Oh, yes, I'm my dyslexia kicking in. Through the 14th, 12th through the 14th. And folks can find out more about that on the website, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. This has been a lot of fun, Doris. It's a fabulous meeting you and have a chance to hear a little bit about that journey of how you got to creating ScyllaDB and creating the products that you have built and specifically the problems that you're going after. So, Dora Laor, who is CEO, co-founder of ScyllaDB, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mitchell. That was great stuff. 2 good interviews. Hey, folks, that's going to call it a wrap on today's edition of TechStrong TV. A reminder again, if you're in the U.S., you can still vote tomorrow if you're registered. If you are, go vote. It's important. We will have a live show on tomorrow, though, at 9:30, and you can listen to some fresh content or watch some fresh content then, no matter where you are. You catch it on demand. Until then, though, this is Alan Schimmel, hoping that you stay safe, stay well, stay strong, tech strong. We're out. Bye-bye.